Hello guys, welcome to Soul Fiction. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto wielded the Eclipse Dojutsu? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. First Shadow of Noon. Naruto had never noticed how bright the night could be until he was running through it with a stolen scroll slapping against his back. The moon was half hidden behind a roll of thin cloud, street lamps were a line of watchful eyes. And every time he cut across the training fields the dew on the grass flashed like a warning. He would swear the light itself was loud, metallic, humming in the corners of his vision, up until branches clawed his sleeves and needles of shadow broke it apart. He didn't stop running until he reached the old clearing beyond the academy grounds, the place where nobody came unless they wanted to beat themselves up without an audience. The scroll of seals thumped to the dirt. He threw himself down and peeled it open with hands that could not stop shaking. Naruto. Iruka's voice came through the trees a minute later. Winded and worried, he stumbled in, flak jacket askew, headband barely straight. One look at the unfurled scroll and his face went the color of paper. What did you do? Naruto's hands went up on their own. It's not what you think. Mizuki-sensei told me there was a special test. He said. Something big cut the air. A circle of iron sang past Iruka's shoulder and thunked into the trunk behind him. Carving wood. The hum in Naruto's ears spiked into a thin, shimmering line. Mizuki stepped into the clearing with another great shuriken balanced in his fingers, smiling too widely for his face. Special test, Mizuki echoed, amused. That's one way to name treason. Iruka moved without hesitation. He put himself between Naruto and Mizuki, knees bent, arms wide. Get out of here, Naruto. No, Naruto managed. I didn't. Go. Mizuki's eyes were mean and hungry. Tell him, Iruka. Tell the demon what he really is. Iruka's hand flinched. Mizuki saw it. The grin curled. 12 years ago. The fox. Shut up, Iruka said, quiet and furious. You throw that and I'll break your hand before it lands. Naruto couldn't breathe. Something inside him tilted. Night felt too deep and too bright at once. Mizuki drew his arm back. Naruto saw the spin before it started, saw the flat ring of metal drink up the lamp glow, saw the dark seam in the air it would carve on its way to Iruka's skull. He did not think. He moved. The grass under him was almost black, the street lamp's halo thinning where the trees' fingers pinched it. He stepped into the thinner the way you step off a stoop in the dark, trusting your foot to find something that would hold you. For a blink, no time at all, his vision narrowed to a pupil of shadow ringed in white. The world staggered. The shuriken passed where he would have been. It hit dirt and vomited splinters. Iruka stumbled with the gust. Mizuki's mouth opened, then he threw the second blade. Naruto didn't have an answer for two. He dragged his arms over his head and every stupid moment in his life flashed by. Paint on the Hokage monument, 1,000 bowls of ramen, Iruka's stern face softening when nobody else looked. The metal howl grew teeth. Naruto flung the only thing he had. A handful of clones burst from him like startled birds. They rushed the line of spin. The first blade chewed foam and smoke. The Khan stuttered as bodies hit it from 3 angles and the hum split in a way that felt wrong, like a note played off key. Iruka dove, shoulder rolling into Naruto and bowling him behind a stump. Stay down, Iruka hissed. Please. Mizuki came across the clearing at a run, kunai out. Something hot and hurt roared up Naruto's spine. Stop calling me. He couldn't say the word Mizuki had not stopped tasting. It barely had a shape in his mouth. Stop calling me that. He shoved to his feet. Mizuki's arm flexed to throw. A breath's worth of instinct told Naruto that trying to block again would get Iruka cut in half. The wrongness in the air, light too bright and too thin, stepped closer. Naruto's eyes throbbed, and the world's edge went soft except for a ring of sharpness that sliced through the dark like a crescent. The ring tightened. For a beat the air itself folded. The sewing of night to light slipped. The spinning blade's edge found no purchase and wobbled, like wind had caught it. It dropped instead of carving and bit the dirt short of Iruka by the length of Naruto's forearm. Mizuki's balance broke with it. Iruka slammed forward, took a hit across the cheek that opened skin, and drove his elbow into Mizuki's ribs. Naruto's clones hit from both sides, not clean, not graceful, just too many arms dragging, too much will stuffed into bodies that lasted long enough to make Mizuki go down. Iruka breathed hard through his nose, one hand pressed to his cheek. He looked at Naruto like the boy had grown two heads. "Your eyes," he said thickly. "They just..." "What?" Naruto swallowed. His heartbeat tried to punch out of his throat. The bright ring in his vision faded, taking the false shine from the grass with it. Black splotches bloomed instead, temporary blind stars. He swiped at them. "What do you mean my eyes?" Iruka shook himself, knelt, and tied Mizuki's hands with a speed that spoke of muscle memory. The trembling in his mouth became a small smile that lived under the pain. "We can talk about your eyes after you stop stealing from Hokage-sama." "Scared me half to death, Naruto." Naruto's stomach did a strange flip. "I thought you were going to die," he blurted. "I thought." Iruka touched his forehead. "You moved fast. And you made the right call." His gaze went quick and protective. "Whatever happened just now, we'll figure it out." Naruto felt suddenly, stupidly 15 pounds lighter. He nodded too many times. Okay." They dragged Mizuki toward the village as dawn started to bleach the edges of the trees. Naruto's head pounded in a way that made light feel sharp. Iruka walked too straight for a man bleeding down his neck, only breaking stride once to tilt Naruto's chin and squint at his eyes again. "Still blue," Iruka murmured, as if that decided something that worried him. "But when you moved, I swear I saw." "Don't say demon." Naruto tried, but his smile wouldn't stick. "A ring," Iruka finished, and left it there. "A strange one." Naruto touched his face, half expecting to feel something burned there. "I didn't mean to." "I know," Iruka said. "That doesn't make it less yours." By the time they reached the Hokage Tower, the sun had cleared the roofs. Naruto had to squint against it like someone was pushing thumbs into his eyes. He stood squirming while the third Hokage listened and asked the questions grown-ups did when they were trying not to yell. A note of tension threaded through the moment around Naruto again. A few shinobi glanced at him sidelong. He kept rubbing his eyes and trying not to snap at anybody. When they were finally outside, Naruto leaned his back against the railing, head tipped up, eyes closed. He felt the heat through his lids like a hand. It was too much. Maybe he was just tired. "Naruto," Iruka said quietly. "Your headband." Naruto blinked. Iruka was holding it out like something precious and dangerous. Naruto reached. His fingers brushed the metal plate. He could see his own face ghosted in the reflection, hair like a scrub brush. Grin held in place by an act of will, and for one heartbeat, there, very faint, a strange, dark ring flecked at the rim of his iris, like eclipse photos he'd seen in books. He flinched. Iruka mistook it. "You earned it," he said. "Don't argue." Naruto tied it on with clumsy hands. He wanted to run until the feeling passed, until the sun stopped pressing hollows into his skull. Until he was too exhausted to feel anything at all. Instead, he forced himself to breathe and managed, "Thanks. For, the whole not dying thing." Iruka's laugh scratched. "Anytime." He didn't sleep. Not really. He lay on his back in his cramped apartment and watched the light crawl across the ceiling. And every time his eyelids fluttered he saw the shimmer around the blade, the way the night had seemed to grab it. When the sun finally sank and the street lamps clicked on, the world softened into something he could stare at without wanting to cry. He put his sandals on and went to the training ground again. The lamps left round islands of glow-on hard-packed dirt, their halos thin where leaves cut them. The wind came soft. Naruto stood in the messy intersection of three lamps and tilted his head until the distances between the circles made sense, until a line from one light to another drew the longest possible shadow under his feet. He tried to step into that thinness again. At first nothing happened. He felt the same, his eyes only his. He imagined the circle inside them that Iruka had seen, imagined it as a ring he could roll on. Tried again. Tried a third time, because that was always the number that mattered. And on the third, the air gave under him like a taut rope flexing. He wasn't gone and he wasn't invisible, but for a breath and no more he felt slightly to the left of where he was and the ground under him went slippery. He stumbled with it and landed on his butt. He was not alone. Some shinobi existed like creeks in stairs, their presence only reached you when you were already falling. Hinata Hyuga existed like air you didn't think about until you needed it. Her voice came from behind him and to the right, soft enough he jolted. Sorry, she said, I am. Immediately mortified that she'd made him jump. I was just passing by. I didn't mean to. He scrambled to his feet, rubbing dirt off the back of his pants. Hinata, hey, hi, you, training, too. Her eyes were pale lavender moons. Clear as glass. The Byakugan sat just under her skin like a promise. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and nodded. Early, or late, it depends. You sleep. A little. She studied him for a long second with that particular Hinata focus that felt like standing in a warm draft. No judgment, just presence. Your movement. You slid. Not far. I'm working on a cool new thing, he said. Purely on reflex. It's super cool in my head. That's where they all start, Hinata said, a surprising dimple flashing for the length of a sigh. May I? She lifted a hand halfway between them. Byakugan can see chakra shifts you might not feel yet. I could, if you wanted, tell you where your shape goes wrong. Naruto had never been good at letting anyone help him. He shrugged like it was nothing, heart banging. Yeah, sure, okay. She came closer with careful economy, as if everything around him might break if she moved too fast. Her fingers hovered above his wrist, not touching until he nodded. You were trying to step into the narrowest part of the shadow, she said. But the lamp halos are blurring your edges. Your chakra spikes too late. Too late. Half a breath. She tapped his wrist once and then lowered her hand as if that tap had been a lot. Start the shift with your breath, not your foot. And, if you can, pick angles, not pretty spots. He frowned. Angles. The places where light fights itself, Hinata said, giving the faintest shrug at her own attempt at poetry. Between two lamps, where the halos push. The angle of cancellation. Okay, he said, serious without meaning to be. Okay, he tried again. The ring in his eye he couldn't see found a rhythm with his chest. He exhaled and moved, heel, then toe, hand cutting air. Hinata's presence sharpened when her eyes went fully Byakugan, veins fanning across her temples like petals. Now, she said, he hit the angle. For a sliver of a heartbeat, the world narrowed. He didn't vanish. Space just looked the wrong way at him, and when it righted he stood a hand's width to the left. He laughed too loud and went to whoop and almost fell again because his depth perception lurched. The lamps skewing out of true. Hinata shot out a hand that found his elbow and steadied him, fingers warm through the fabric. He froze like a cat in a bathtub. Sorry, she said, snatching her hand back. Are you dizzy? A little, he admitted. But, it worked. I did a thing. You did. He scratched the back of his neck, suddenly aware he was sweaty and covered in dust. Thanks. For the angles. You're welcome. Her smile came and went like a breath. If you want longer shadows, dawn is kinder than night. Dawn, he echoed, mind jumping ahead in 6 directions at once. Mission briefs. New teams. The thrill in his bones at the word ninja actually fitting him. Yeah, dawn. When he showed up at the gate the next morning, Kakashi raised an eyebrow in that way that ain't his whole face moved 12 millimeters and still managed to say really. Sasuke looked irritated at the hour. Sakura looked murderous until Naruto said, longer shadows, and then just confused. Tazuna, their client, looked like a hangover in human form. I asked for ninja, he muttered, taking in Naruto's grin like insult added to injury. They send me children and a man reading a smutty book. Kakashi's eye crinkled. I can walk and read. You'll be safe. They left while the sun was still stuck behind the eastern roofs. The road out of Konoha wore a sash of mist. Naruto jogged at the fro. NT and kept glancing at the wavering shapes their bodies made, the way their shadows stretched long and thin into the trees. It felt like having an extra sense he couldn't name yet, he would not admit it out loud. But dawn was easier to look at than noon. The first ambush hit as a quiet wrongness, like the air was about to sneeze. Dew had not broken on the leaves under one clump of brush, and the line of shadow on the road stepped slightly out of time with the wind. Naruto's shoulders tensed without permission. He cut 2 fingers toward the ground to get Kakashi's attention and half signed down as if he'd always known how. Sakura blinked at him like he'd switched languages. Tazuna frowned. The demon brothers tore out of the brush a heartbeat later, chains spitting between their gauntlets. Naruto didn't think and therefore did exactly what he needed to do. He grabbed Tazuna's sleeve with his left hand and fell backward, dragging the old man down so the chain hissed overhead, then spun WITH the drag and kicked dirt into the chain's path. For a blink the dust caught the light and fuzzed his view, but the fuzz was an advantage. He could see where the chain cut a bright line through it. He pushed, not with muscles, with that new ring sense like pressing a finger against a bubble. The chain shivered and dipped out of the absolute center of its path. It was enough. Sasuke's kunai sang across it and bit. Kakashi appeared where the chain had been, caught a gauntlet, and slammed one brother into the other. Sakura of all people, snatched Tazuna by the collar and rolled him behind a tree with neat urgency that didn't scream. It was over so fast Naruto barely had time to regret not shouting a cool line. Kakashi dusted his hands like he'd just folded laundry. Good eye, Naruto. That sign. Who taught you that? Naruto blinked. It made sense. He resisted the urge to glance around for a pale-eyed girl and say the angles taught me. Isn't it what you do? Sasuke gave him something that might have been a nod if Sasuke was less allergic to giving anyone anything. Sakura's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. You moved Tazuna first, she said, like she was trying on the idea of respect for size. You really what? Naruto said, unable to stop the grin. Really did good, she finished, and it came out grudging and real. Tazuna brushed dirt off his sleeve. Don't expect a tip. Kakashi trussed the brothers with casual zip, eye tracking the tree line as if waiting for the next wrongness. His gaze snagged on Naruto's face and lingered. You squinting at the sunlight. I'm fine, Naruto lied. He wasn't going to admit the spike of pressure behind his eyes had come back. They pushed on. By the time they reached the river, the fog had thickened into something you could lean on. A fisherman ferried them in a flat-bottomed boat, oars whispering. Naruto sat near the prow and tried not to draw lines between lamp halos that weren't there. Mist had no edges and it made his eyelids twitch. He closed his eyes and listened to water clap the hull and Kakashi turn a page every 30 seconds like a metronome. Wave country smelled like damp wood and nerves. Houses crouched low, fishermen kept their voices, and the air itself seemed to keep secrets. The bridge in the distance grew out of the fog like a thing mid-summon. Zabuza Momochi met them on the water. He didn't bother with a hello. One moment there was just fog like breath on glass. The next moment the fog had a purpose and the purpose was a blade the size of a conversation you didn't want to have. Guard your client, Kakashi said. His voice was unlazy in a way Naruto had only heard once, when the man had stopped a knife with 2 fingers and a sigh. Don't move unless I say. Mist rose like a hand. Naruto's ring sense shrank to a coin behind his eyes. Zabuza's killing intent punched through it. Kakashi stepped forward and the two of them began a dance Naruto could only watch out of the corner of his eye while keeping a hand on Tazuna's sleeve. Sasuke's breathing was too fast and too steady at once. Sakura had her back to Tazuna and her eyes on the fog, trying to cover every angle with only 2. Naruto felt useless for 3 heartbeats and then he remembered Hinata's voice saying angles, not pretty spots. The mist wasn't flat. Even fog had differences. Thicker pockets where air cooled against stone. Thinner drifts where wind slipped through. Naruto shut up and let himself feel the slight shove on his cheeks where a breeze narrower than a hand brushed him. If he had been alone he might have called it stupid. With people he had to protect, he let stupid try. Zabuza's killing intent gleamed through the fog like an unblinking eye. Kakashi met it with something slant and deeper. Steel rang. Water slapped. Naruto felt, not saw, the big man change direction. He put a foot where the breeze thinned and said low, left. Lower. Sasuke didn't ask how he knew. He simply turned, and sent a fan of shuriken into the fog where Naruto's gut pointed. A grunt answered. It didn't make Zabuza slow, but it made him notice. Interesting, Zabuza's voice said from everywhere. The brat can read the mist. Kakashi's silence was answer enough. The wrongness changed flavor. The moment it did, Kakashi was suddenly not there. Water slammed up and caged him in a sphere, and you could feel the smug from Zabuza even through the fog. "Don't move," Zabuza said cheerfully. His clone, formed of the same water, advanced on them with the big sword held sideways. "Do. I like the noise." The why moved anyway because that was the decision hidden in the choices. Naruto's body went a fraction before his brain, because if he waited to think about how outmatched he was he would never move again. He snapped 2 clones into existence, shoved one in front of Tazuna, and threw himself to the right, toward thinner fog, toward a stone that felt like an anchor for things that wanted to slip. The water clone swung. Naruto saw the arc not as a blade but as a thin bright line cutting damp air. He didn't have time to be smart. He didn't have a plan worthy of a captain. He had a flicker of anger and fear in that new sense itching for use. He shoved again. Not against the clone, not even against the sword. Against the blade's edge, against the place where it separated light from not light. The shove was as much wish as will. The bright line hiccuped and swam. The sword still came down and it still hurt when it met his blocking forearms, but the precise, terrible cut he'd prepared for didn't land. It smashed instead, a fraction off. And Naruto lived in the slop. Sasuke slid through the opening like he'd been waiting for it. Kunai drew a line across the clone's side. The water bulged and tried to remember being human. Sakura, God bless her practical, terrified heart, hauled Tazuna backward and plunked him behind a broken pillar. Naruto sucked a breath so hard it almost whistled and then ate a choice he'd only half practiced. He stepped at the angle where the world felt thinner and hoped. He slid, not far, a shoulder's worth, but it put him inside the clone's guard for an instant and his fist, stupid, brave, drove into the clone's fake stomach. Water tried to be guts and wasn't. The clone rippled, not enough, and then Sasuke's foot found the spot Naruto had softened and the clone went down like a puddle remembering it was a puddle. Zabuza made an almost laugh from the prison holding Kakashi's head. "Cute trick. I've always liked children who improvise," Kakashi said, tone light, breath tight. "Good," Zabuza replied. "Improvise your last breath." Naruto didn't hear the rest because the pressure behind his eyes suddenly sharpened into something like heat. He turned toward the sphere. Kakashi's face was a calm he wasn't sure was real. The sphere cheated at the world, light sliding strange where water bent it. Naruto stared at the bright ring around the edge of the prison, at the thin place where outside met in. And thought wildly about holding. He could not break it. He couldn't be what stories kept promising him in his own head. But maybe he could make a thin place thinner. Distract him. Naruto breathed to Sasuke. No time to be proud. No time to pretend they weren't 2 idiots with a shinobi's knives playing at the edge of a man's legend. Sasuke didn't ask how. He flung a shallow arc of weapons that would never have killed Zabuza but definitely irritated him. Sakura shouted in a way that sounded like a scream and was actually a signal. Naruto put both hands up, fingers spread toward the prison, and pushed on the line where the water met air the way you might push on the surface of a drum. The ring in his eye clenched. The prison's skin quivered. Ear beat the light around it fuzzed. Just enough that Kakashi's outline moved, just enough that Zabuza's splay-fingered hand twitched open to compensate. Kakashi ripped his arm free through that tiny moment of wrongness and broke the prison like a man pulling a sheet off a bed. Water collapsed. Zabuza swore like a man whose day had complicated unexpectedly. The fight that followed was loud and fast, and too big for Naruto to be anything but a piece of it. Kakashi took the lead because he had to, because if he didn't then none of them would last the next minute. Naruto found the thinness when he could, slid when he could, shoved at edges when he couldn't. He heard Sasuke's breath turn into a measured machine, heard Sakura count Tazuna's heartbeats under hers out loud without meaning to. The end came on a breath of needles. They came from nowhere. They hit Zabuza from an angle that felt like the world had been folded and the needles slid through the crease. Zabuza staggered, made a sound that was more surprise than pain, and went to his knees with the big sword slamming into the bridge with an ugly clang. A figure in a mask stood in the fog like a chalk line drawn on wet stone. "Momochi Zabuza," the masked one said, voice light, empty, "demon of the hidden mist. I've come to hunt you." Kakashi's posture loosened in ways that meant nothing good. "Hunter Nin." Naruto stared. He hadn't T known he had the energy to be angry until the mask lifted Zabuza as if he were a fallen friend instead of a target. He hadn't known he could be jealous of an enemy's rescue. He tasted the Strangene's in the way the needles had cut the air. His ring sense wanted to call it something and didn't have words. Thank you for making my work easier, the hunter Nin said politely. I'll take care of the body from here. The fog swallowed them. One breath there, the next the fog had them. The big sword was gone. The bridge was only the bridge again. Damp stone, cold air, 4 kids and a tired man with the sort of eyes that make you feel like you've missed a piece of a joke. Kakashi's shoulders dropped. For the first time since the water prison, he looked a little older than he had in the morning. We're done for today, Tazuna. Let's get you home. Stay alert. This fog is friendly to people who don't like us. They went. Naruto walked with the scent of needles in his head and the shape of a strange ring burned in the backs of his eyes. He did not know what his eyes were doing to him, only that the sun would be trouble and the night wanted bargains. That night at Tazuna's house he lay on a T.N. mattress and stared at a ceiling that leaked if you looked at it wrong. The light from a crooked lamp breathed in and out because of a loose wire, and every time it dimmed his head stopped throbbing. And every time it brightened the ache returned, regular as waves. Sakura slept like someone who'd won an argument with herself, and Sasuke slept like someone lecturing his dreams. Kakashi sat at the low table with a book he wasn't reading. When Naruto couldn't stand the lamp's pulse anymore, he got up and took it apart. He made the wire sit right. He turned the lamp so the halo lay along the floor instead of across his face. He stood in the shallow fan of light and played with the thinness there, tiny, careful, sliding half a foot and no more, stopping when the dark splotches came at the edges of his sight. Kakashi did not look up. I saw something on the bridge, he said conversationally. In the way you move. Misleading, for a genin. I move weird, Naruto said. True, Kakashi said, but this was the useful kind of weird. Naruto fiddled with the lamp like it was a mission. Can I ask something? When the needles hit, the air looked wrong. Is that real or does my head get weird under fog? Kakashi's eye slanted up then. A little amused, a little sharp. Everything looks wrong in fog, he said. But if you're asking whether you can trust your instincts, we will find out by trusting them and seeing if we die. Reassuring, Naruto said. It made him grin, stupidly, even so. Get some sleep, Kakashi said. Tomorrow we visit a bridge builder's enemies. The lamp burned steady. Naruto curled back onto the mattress and let his eyes close because Hinata was right. Dawn is kinder to shadows. He fell asleep more angry than afraid, which was better, and in his dream a ring of dark slid over a bright disk and the world held its breath. Across a sea and mountain and the long thin roads between, a room without windows watched its candles instead. The flames did something no C and L. E should. They dimmed all at once at noon and then sprang back like something had passed between them and the sun. 5 figures stood around a table, each in the kind of clothing that meant they wanted you to think they weren't important. A monk with a face cut by scowls and years lifted a piece of charcoal and drew a short, certain circle on the map pinned to the wood. Again, he said. His voice was dry as old paper. The signature. A woman with smooth hands and a military knot for a mouth leaned over the map. A bridge in wave. A pattern in the light. You sure this isn't just weather? The monk's thumbnail scraped the map. Weather doesn't make candles bow like that. He moved. The monk said, as if they were already talking about a person at a table with them. You know the oath. We contain what the world can't. Another man, younger, too handsome to be comfortable with, laughed into his sleeve. Contain, or bury. The monk didn't smile. He pinned a small black pin into wave country. The head of it catching the candlelight. The light dimmed around it for a breath and came back stubborn. Find the source, he said. Bring it here, or make certain it no longer moves. The woman's mouth thinned. And if it's strapped to a boy. Especially then, the monk said. The candles burned steady. The room's door opened and closed with the small respect of people who kill you by being nice enough to knock. Far away, a boy who had not asked for any of this rolled over in his sleep and reached for a place where shadow met light as if he could hold it. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Forest of Parhelions. The training field at dawn looked like someone had sketched it in pencil and left the ink for later. The lamps along the path had gone out, the sky hadn't decided on its color. And shadows were long enough to trip over. Naruto stood in the middle of it with his hands open and his breath measured, waiting for the minute each morning when everything in the world held still for 2 heartbeats. Now, Hinata said, and her voice slid into that stillness like a thin blade. He moved. Solar aspect wanted to sprint. Lunar wanted to exhale. He tried to hold both in his head and let the body choose. For a blink, the edges of his vision sharpened and his skin prickled as if the air had rolled up its sleeves. Hinata stepped in, her palm almost brushing his forearm, almost. Soft fist chakra rolled from her fingertips like a drumbeat under the skin, and when Naruto snapped forward with the burst of pressure he called Korin. No, Corona, Hinata's touch met it and split it. The clone in front of them didn't pop so much as peel. Its chakra folded over itself in a tidy crease and vanished. Hinata lowered her hand, cheeks pink from the cold, not from the closeness. Again, Naruto grinned with too many teeth because emotions were harder to hold than stances. Again, he echoed, and meant it. They worked until the sky got color. Hinata's Byakugan made a map of his mistakes, and she shared the parts he could fix without making him feel like a project. She counted his breath without counting out loud. He learned to time Corona flare, short, bright, and then stop before. The white creep crawled into his vision. On the 3rd set, he overdid it anyway. The world bleached and went spotty. His heel skidded. Don't chase it, Hinata said, close enough for her voice to be solid. Let it come to you. Kind of rude to call my cool move, it, he muttered, blinking away stars. My cool move has feelings. She made that tiny smile that always felt like he'd earned something. Then your cool move is sensitive to posture. Again, he dug in. They caught the rhythm once more, and this time when Corona hit, Hinata's palm nudged and split the surge at his elbow, sending Alf the pressure to his offhand where it rolled into a second strike that landed with satisfying snap. 2 bursts, 1 motion, clean. Hinata's eyes widened a hair, and he tried not to puff up like a pigeon. We'll name it later, he said, breathless in the good way. Hinata glanced at the horizon where the light was getting teeth. You should rest your eyes before the exam. Daylight will be harder. Yeah, he said. He didn't look at the sun. The academy auditorium smelled like paper and fear. Ibiki's scars made the front of the room look like a cautionary tale. Naruto sat, tried to hold a pencil without breaking it, and could feel the proctor's attention like threads pulled tight. He stared at the test and his brain made a loud, empty room. He could have glanced left. He could have tried to read light bends over ink and hoped, not cheating, had a legal loophole. He didn't. He kept his head down and hands still and heart rate somewhere between I will live forever and I am going to die right here under a math problem. Around the 3rd question, when his pride and panic were wrestling in the pit of his stomach, Hinata's foot tapped under the table. Not a signal to copy. A rhythm to breathe on. In on 1, out on 3. On the 9th breath, he could hear Ibiki talking even when the man wasn't. If you're still here when I ask, it's because you've chosen to be. When the time came in, the room bristled for his trick question. Naruto lifted his hand because lifting it felt like not hiding. We'll take your stupid risk, he said, voice steady despite his mouth's best efforts to ruin it. 'Cause if we back down now, then what are we even doing here? Ibiki's eyebrow made an approving shape that absolutely did not look like approval. Spoken like a genin with nothing to lose, he drawled, and let them pass. The relief in the room tasted like sweat. Outside, people buzzed. Kiba strutted. Ino declared her nails intact and that, by extension, Team 10 would be fine. Tamari leaned against a column with a fan closed like a secret and watched people move as if she could sift information from their footfalls. When her eyes slid across Naruto, she looked amused at the way he read his shoulders and at the way Hinata's breath sidled closer to his. Try not to die in the forest, Tamari said when she passed him, like offering a favor she didn't have to. You too, Naruto said, a half grin thrown back over his shoulder. It'd be embarrassing if you lost to a test with trees. She snorted. It's a test with people. The forest of death made noon feel like evening. Rope thanked. sagged around a gate with a proctor whose smile said, "We won't find all of you." Anko Mitarashi gave a speech with the energy of a warning sign wearing lipstick and then flicked a kunai that whistled past someone's ear hard enough to clip the hair and make a point. Teams, present your consent forms. Keep your limbs. Do not feed the wildlife. If the wildlife feeds on you, do it quietly. Naruto rolled his eyes and turned his face away from the patchwork sunlight. He adjusted his bandana lower over his brow. The glare off the leaves was meaner than the gate. They entered at the horn. The shift from village noise to forest breath was abrupt enough to feel like stepping underwater. Shadows wove. The smell under the canopy was sap and damp earth and something sweet rot that lived on trunks. Naruto focused on what Hinata had said. Angles, not pretty spots. Sun shafts speared the gloom. The places between were not darker so much as fuzzed, and the fuzz was a friend. Scroll, Sakura said, "Lo. If we have earth, plan for heaven. If we have heaven, plan for earth. Plan for both," Sasuke said, which was just his way of saying I intend to steal someone else's lunch. Hinata's eyes went pale and wide. Veins winged elegant at her temples. 2 teams ahead, 1 behind, far. Movement above us, small. Birds, Naruto guessed. Not all, she said, and there was something like humor in it. Some are proctors. They ran light, choosing paths with a quickness that came from trusting each other's calls. Twice, Naruto stopped them with a hand because a patch of shade wasn't acting like shade. Once, Sasuke's kunai thunked into a hidden wire and an entire log swung into the space where their heads had been. Sakura thanked no gods in particular and then reset the trap behind them with a saint of twine that looked like home EC plus malice. They found the first enemy team near a dry creek where sunlight broke into coins. Sandals scuffed, whisper voices lied, and everybody pretended not to want what everyone wanted. Naruto let himself be dumb on purpose until the exact breath when it mattered. Then Umbra's screen fanned from his fingers in a loose veil of gray, not a smoke bomb but a SMU. DGE on the light that blurred edges without hiding forms. In the moment the enemy blinked to recalibrate, Sasuke was there with speed, Sakura with a sweep, and Hinata stepping through with gentle violence. Closing Tenketsu like she was putting out candles. They took a heaven scroll and didn't gloat, not out loud, anyway. Naruto tried not to stagger when the Umbra drop ended and his vision caught up. "Careful," Hinata murmured, "too close to be meant for anyone else. You're grabbing for it too hard. You can tell. The veins in your eyes stand out." She hesitated. "It looks painful. Feels like being yelled at by light." Naruto said. "Weird to be yelled at by light." They slept in a tree where 3 trunks braided together and the branches made a cradle. Naruto drew himself small on a CK limb and watched a patch of sky argue with clouds while Sakura counted soft under her breath and Sasuke pretended he didn't sleep at all. He woke to a wind that didn't belong to the forest. It smelled like damp caves and sick metal. The light didn't change, precisely, but the angles did, the way angles change when you look at a room through the wrong end of a bottle. His skin went tight. Hinata's hand found his sleeve even before her eyes went white. "Do you feel?" "Yeah," he said. The snake that crawled into view was too big for the trees. It moved with slow, indulgent force, and on its CK stood a man whose smile was better suited to a mirror than a face. Pale skin, hair like spilled ink, eyes that didn't belong to anyone who slept recently or at all. "Good morning," Orochimaru said. "Gifted children." Sasuke froze the way heat freezes when you open a door in winter. Sakura's throat worked once. Hinata's hand left Naruto's sleeve and curled into a fist at her chest. Naruto didn't try to make a speech or a plan with nouns. He looked at the way Orochimaru bent the light without trying, the way the shadow at his feet didn't quite match the leaves, and understood on a gut level that if they behaved like exam takers, they would die like exam takers. "Down," he said. Now, they dropped out of the tree as the snake's head came through the branches above with lazy cruelty. It the space where their bodies had been a beat before. Bark shredded. Orochimaru laughed, a soft sound like someone approving a child's drawing before setting it on fire. Sasuke moved first the way he always did when fear made him decide. He went for Orochimaru directly and with too much grace to be smart. The air tightened, and Naruto but felt, the thin line Orochimaru drew from his own hand to Sasuke's chest. An invitation to distance that looked like safety. Right, Naruto said, and threw penumbra veil between them. Not an illusion in the normal sense, not a lie. A tilt, a misalignment. Sasuke's lunge shortened by the half-step Naruto stole with the veil. Orochimaru's reach misjudged by the same measure. Fingers scraped cloth and not skin. Sasuke's blade bit and drew a line. That made Orochimaru hiss like a kettle. It wasn't deep enough to matter, but it mattered that it existed. The air went colder. Interesting, Orochimaru said lightly. You break the picture without breaking the glass. Sorry, Naruto said, breath burning. We're out of glass. The snake came again. Sakura swore with authority and put a kunai exactly where Sasuke's foot would be if he needed leverage, and then he needed it. And kicked off and wasn't a smear under the snake's mouth. Hinata slid in from the side and tapped 3 points at the snake's jaw with fierce gentleness. Its mouth shuddered and hung wrong. The hinge refusing to be a hinge. Naruto tried Sasuke step to the snake's top to get to Orochimaru's blind side. The lighting wasn't right. Noon here was a rumor and shadows were lazy. He slid a fraction and paid for it with a vertigo snap that made his stomach lurch. Orochimaru noticed the wrongness and smiled like he'd found a new toy. Show me again, Orochimaru crooned, Naruto hated how much of him wanted to obey. He didn't. He threw occlusion field instead, collapsing the glossy shine along the snake's scales in front of Hinata so her palm strike landed clean as an answer. The snake bucked. Orochimaru leapt and flowed as if gravity was a rumor he had chosen to believe only for style. The world broke. Not in half. Not even a lot. Just enough for the trees to be too tall and the ground too near and faces too narrow. Genjutsu sat over the forest like a wet cloth. The air felt full of needles and syrup. Naruto didn't try to dispel it by will. He tilted it. He widened the lie's edges until the pressure changed and there was a seam, and then he pushed through the seam like you push past someone in a doorway who won't decide if they're going in or out. They came out in the same forest. Which was the point? Orochimaru's brows lifted, very slightly. You'll grow interesting, he said. Sasuke's breathing sounded like a file on steel. He had his shoulder set, like a man bracing for a wave that hadn't hit yet. The snake flexed and bled where Hinata had told it to forget how to bite. Orochimaru moved faster than thought and slower than dread. He was suddenly behind Sasuke with his mouth near the boy's neck because Orochimaru liked theater. Naruto didn't think. He flooded Corona in a reckless arc that scorched his own vision and he was there, hand on Sasuke's collar, ripping him a hand's breadth forward. Orochimaru's teeth scraped skin and left a mark that smoked, but it didn't bite deep. It didn't spiral. The pale man clicked his tongue. Selfish, he told Naruto, amused. Saving other people from their tests. Take a number, Naruto said, vision buzzing, head full of white. We've got a line. Sakura's hand shook when she set a bandage over the not quite seal. Hinata's breathing went too fast once, then smoothed by force. Sasuke looked at Naruto like he didn't know what to do with the debt. Orochimaru tilted his head like a collector deciding whether to wait for the full set. He didn't stay to find out. He slid back onto the snake like stepping into a coat and let it carry him into the green with a promise, we'll finish the lesson later. The silence afterward was loud. Sakura swallowed. Is that a curse mark? Hinata's eyes softened with relief when she looked. Shallow. Wrong shape. But it will hurt. Understatement, Sasuke said through his teeth. Naruto stared at the place where Orochimaru had vanished. The light there was still at an angle that made no sense. He wanted to throw a kunai into it just to see if the kunai came back older. A bell rang in the forest that wasn't a bell. Hinata's eyes snapped toward the sound. 3, she said. No, 5, fast. They didn't come from the trees, which would have made sense. They came from the shadows as if the shadows had been caged and the cage doors had opened inward. Men in plain armor and monk black wraps, faces uncovered like they didn't need masks to be anyone. ACH carried what looked like a lantern without light. Leaf Genin, the oldest said. A scar cut his top lip and made every word look like a small wound. Stand down. Sasuke lifted his chin. Exam. This is not your exam, the man said, and set his lantern down. It made a sound like distance falling. The sunlight that made it through the leaves bent toward the lantern and then didn't exist. The ground around the black metal dulled, as if someone had told the color to be quiet. Naruto's ring sense went blind. Back, Hinata said, and her hand found Naruto's arm again without asking. Those seals. Null, the man said, as if he'd heard. Step away from the boy with the eyes. Sakura's stance shifted in the small way that meant she'd decided not to cry, not yet. He's just a genin. So is a kunai, the man said, and set a second lantern. The air lost depth. It didn't turn dark. It turned flat. Naruto tried to open Umbra and found nothing to grab. Not even absence. A bare patch of ground without shadow isn't emptiness. It's a refusal. He tasted copper. He could still move, still make clones, still be loud and stubborn and quick, but the thing behind his eyes that had started making the world a set of good ideas was choking. Who are you? He asked, because he could always talk while everything went sideways. Rude Lantern Club, Forest Park Rangers, people who hate lamps. The older man's mouth did not care for jokes. Pale hand, he said, and then, because he'd trained himself to be clear, we contain what breaks the world before the world breaks. Kneel, or, Naruto asked, because asking kept fear from setting up a lawn chair in his lungs. Or we cut your legs where they bend, the man said. Sasuke moved first this time because pride is a muscle and he doesn't skip it. He went at a lantern with murderous resolve. His kick hit the metal and came away numb. The seal shimmered along the cage and ate the impact, not canceling it so much as filing it, then locking the drawer. A second pale hand operative slid in and tried to take Sasuke apart at the joints with efficient strikes. Sakura intercepted the last one with her forearm and hissed through her teeth but held. Hinata pivoted and tapped the operative's wrist. The hand that followed did not agree to make a fist anymore. Take the containers, the leader snapped. Bury the eye, not bury me, Naruto noted, dizzy. Bury the eye. He wasn't sure if it made him less angry or more. He did not try Corona. The glare behind his eyes was already a fist. He didn't try Umbra. The seals had eaten every angle he knew how to love. He moved like a person who had been taught to move by failure and stubbornness. He faked left with a clone that popped on purpose, slid right with a syzygy half-step that nearly threw him to his knees when the null field grabbed the shadow he needed and took it away. He almost went down and would have if Hinata's voice hadn't landed right behind his ear like a hand. Listen, she said, not loud. Calm. Your feet. Not the light. Listen. He listened. He heard leaves brush bark. He heard a pale hand man exhale like a man who ran track before he learned vows. He heard the scrape of a lantern cage on stone. The soft hiss of seal on air. He moved on the exhale and not the edge, and his fist landed in a place that made the lantern slide half an inch. Sakura was already there. She PLA. NTED and dragged with both hands and a sound like someone who had very much decided how today would go. The lantern came free of the ground with a ripping noise that made Naruto's teeth ache, and suddenly there was a shadow again. Just a small one, just enough to remind him how the world felt when it was his to stand in. He didn't waste it. Umbra's scream poured from his hands and didn't die this tea. Me because the seal was off the exact patch of ground he needed it not to be on. The field didn't hide anyone. It made everything harder to guess, and guessing burns time. Time let Hinata take a wrist and a throat and set both down softly somewhere that would not be a problem for a minute. An arrow of wind cut through the weird air like a voice that didn't belong to anybody they knew. It hit the DGE of a second lantern and sent it rolling. A girl in sand colors walked out of the trees like she'd been painted there, then changed her mind. Temari's fan was closed and resting on her shoulder. She looked at the 5 grown men in plain armor and the 3 exhausted children in breathing positions and made the kind of face a good older sister makes when someone picks on the small ones she has decided are under her jurisdiction today. Exams say nothing about heavily armed uncles, she called, as if to the proctors who were pretending not to exist. Konoha, you really going to let your kids get dog-piled by monks? This is outside the exam, the pale hand leader snapped, eyes on Naruto. Stay out of it, Sand. Temari considered the geometry. You could see her doing it. You could see her race wind in the air with her eyes the way Naruto traced shadow. She sighed dramatically and flicked her fan open with a lazy grace that screamed, "I am not lazy at all." "Here's the thing," she said. "I don't like grown men hunting children. It's tacky." She snapped the fan once. Wind carved through the umbra like a river lays down a bed. Naruto felt the path of it, a clear lane his eyes understood. He didn't need to be told what to do. He stepped into that lane and used it like a spine. Corona flashed and died short of the white pain because he caught it early. He hit an operative in the ribs. The exact angle Temari's wind made light bend, and the man folded in a way that made him drop the lantern instead of keep it. "Nice aim," Naruto called, and Temari rolled her eyes as if compliments were beneath her and also exactly her fuel. "Try not to die before you can be properly annoying," she said, flicking the fan again. Wind took the null cage and threw it into a thornbush. The leader stopped playing. He dropped 2 more lanterns at once, and the ground spit the shadows back out of itself like bones. The field sank the way a pond skins over. Naruto's head filled with static. The urge to shove both aspects open and burn through it crawled up his throat with a conviction that felt like drowning. He heard Hinata inhale. He knew how her breath sounded now when she was about to stop him from doing something stupid. He did it anyway. Solar and lunar met for a blink. The ring behind his eyes narrowed to a hole punched through a bright sheet. The world's color broke. Sound stood in place. The nearest lantern stuttered like bad candles and the null field around them wrinkled as if he'd had touched cold glass. Naruto's body said we can and then said we can't. The white ache detonated. His vision went swimming in tar. He felt himself falling into a place that didn't have hands to catch him. "Back," Hinata's voice said. "Not. Stop. Not. Don't. Back. Naruto. Back. Breathe. With me." He'd never been good at doing anything anyone told him to do the first time. He did this one because it was Hinata asking and because the alternative was blind. He let the lunar aspect drop first. He let Corona bleed away in a controlled spill instead of a dump. He counted with Hinata because the counting was solid. When the white faded, it left a dark that was manageable. He blinked and edges crawled back into the world. His knees said terrible things about his judgment. Temari's fan took a lantern clean in half. Sakura's heel came down on a second one with the noisy satisfaction of Psalm E1 breaking a machine that had insulted her. Sasuke dragged the leader by his collar into the shallow angle of shade that the broken lanterns couldn't eat fast enough, and Hinata's palm took the man's wrist apart in 3 small, loving adjustments. The fight didn't end so much as stop being possible. The operatives who could still stand stepped back. The leader didn't look angry. He looked like a ledger with a number in the wrong column. "This is not the last ask," he said to Naruto. "The eye belongs where it can be controlled." Naruto wanted to say a thing about belonging to himself. He wanted to be good at speeches. He settled for baring his teeth. "Get in line," he said again, hoarse. "I'm busy." The pale hand melted into the trees the way professionals do when a mission becomes tomorrow's problem. The field with the lanterns breathed a sigh and let the shadows be shadows again. Temari closed her fan and rested it on her shoulder, eyes cool and amused and weighing. "You kids keep interesting enemies," she said. "Don't get used to me bailing you out." "We had it," Sasuke said automatically. It wasn't bravado, it was habit. "Sure," Temari said, "and I prefer apples to mangoes. Doesn't make them grow in my yard." She tilted her head at Naruto. "You going to keep playing with that eye until it eats you?" "Working on the part where it doesn't," Naruto said. He was not going to sit down in front of her. He was absolutely not going to wobble. "Thanks. Don't get in my way in the finals," she said, and was gone in 3 steps as if the forest had always been her hallway. They sat, not long, just long enough for the shakes to show up now that the important part was over. Sakura bound Sasuke's not curse with a care that made his jaw unclench by degrees. Hinata pressed 2 fingertips under Naruto's jaw and waited until his pulse slowed before she let them fall. He breathed with her until he could do it by himself. That was almost. Sakura started. "Stupid," Sasuke offered. "Deadly," Hinata said softly. Because she refused to call bravery the wrong name even when it needed scolding. "Don't do that alone again. I had you," Naruto said. He meant it. She looked away and that flustered way she had and he wished, suddenly, he had said it better. They made the tower before dark. The proctors who took their scroll looked at Naruto's face and did nothing with the information there. Anko smirked at the bandage on Sasuke's neck and then at Kakashi over her shoulder like, "Your kids make fun stories." Kakashi wasn't there to be smirked at, but the sentiment held. That night on the tower's roof, Naruto sat with his back against the low wall and watched the forest breathe. The moon made the trees into a sea. Hinata sat beside him, their shoulders not touching but close. Enough that the air between them had temperature. "Parhelion," Hinata said, apropos of nothing. When he looked over, she colored and rushed on. "The word, for the halo. When sunlight refracts and makes a second sun. That thing with the dots next to the real thing," Naruto said, pretending he had always known. "Fake suns. Not fake," she said, defensive of the sky. "Just made by angles." He breathed out a laugh. "Parhelion palm." He tried, letting the syllables sit on his tongue. "Ours." She ducked her head, pleased, shy. "Ours." Below them, the forest stirred. Far away, under a mountain in a room without windows, a charcoal pin slid a finger's width on a map, from wave to leaf to the black place in between. The monk's mouth thinned. The candles bowed in unison and then rose. On the roof, Naruto closed his eyes and saw not white, not dark, but a ring that for the first time felt like something he might one day open without breaking. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," Hinata echoed. He didn't sleep easily, but when the dreams came, they were mostly of wind carving clear lanes through bad air and a hand on his elbow that never let go. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Smoke over sunlight. In Konoha tasted like roasted chestnuts and fresh-cut grass until the wind went the wrong way. Naruto felt it before the first scream. Not in his eye, not in the ring he was learning to coax, just in the way sound bent. The stadium held a crowd's joy like a bowl holds water. Then something lifted the bowl and everything sloshed. Feathers fell. For a blink it was pretty, paper white against the brilliant blue, children pointing. Vendors laughing. Then the first row blinked double slow and slumped in their seats. A proctor's hand shot up. You could hear the inhale the village took, all at once. "Genjutsu," Hinata breathed, and Naruto's body was already moving. He didn't break it. He wasn't that shinobi. He tilted. Penumbra veil rolled out of him like a dark eyelid half lowered. The fall of feathers skewed, the rhythm shifted, and the lie lost its grip on the small patch of stands Naruto claimed as his. People twitched awake, frightened and guilty for having slept. He heard Sakura's voice somewhere below, counting, 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 turning panic into numbers and numbers into action. Tamari was a slice of green and tan across the arena, sand headband tilted like a dare, watching. Everything with that lazy measured gaze that meant she'd already counted angles twice. Her brothers had disappeared. That alone could have been the omen. The first explosive tag cracked. The second detonated 100 feet away, a stupid, arrogant boom that shook dust from the rafters. The Hokage's sigh carried across the open air with infinite patience and a thin thread of grief. Orochimaru's SM. Eel looked exactly like it had in the forest. The barrier rose around them, a square of purple fire, and Konoha's noon turned to war. "What's our job?" Kakashi said without looking away from the smoke rising beyond the stadium walls. "Protect civilians, secure the tower roots, don't die," Sakura snapped, already binding a little boy's skin knee with hands that shook only when they didn't have work. In that order, Sasuke's mouth made a tight line that would have been an argument an hour ago. Now he nodded. He glanced at Hinata and then at Naruto. Without comment, he shifted toward the west exit. Naruto swallowed something that might have been a noise. He scanned the stands and found the single pair of eyes that steadied him. "Byakugan," Hinata said softly, veins blooming delicate petals around the steel of her gaze. "Main stairwell is clogged. 2 exits open on the north side. People there will panic if they see flame. I'll give them something else to look at," Naruto said. He hit the steps running and never stopped. Umbra's screen fanned in front of the bottleneck, not to hide, it would have made the crush worse, but to blur the silhouettes of the fire below so it looked farther away. He vaulted the railing and landed knee first beside an old woman who refused to move because her husband was sleeping. "Child, he's sleeping, let him sleep." He scooped the old man up bodily and grinned a lie. "He can nap on the other side," Naruto said. The cushions are better. People laughed in the thin, brittle way that meant they had almost remembered how. They moved. The world shifted again under his feet as smoke took the sun and made the air gray. Wind. Temeri's voice cut across the stadium like a thrown kunai. Hold. A blade of air cleaved through the smoke rolling toward the north exit and turned it billowed up, not down. Naruto slid a look across to her and saw the smallest sliver of teeth behind her smirk. He lifted 2 fingers in a salute he did not have the right to. Her eye roll said, "You're welcome. Try not to get killed because I helped you." Outside, noise. In every direction, noise. Konoha did not fall quiet when threatened. It filled the airtime with decisions, shutters slamming, runners shouting, sandals slapping tile, metal meeting metal, bells that were not bells, the clack of anbu, maybe, or the pale hands' little lantern mouths unlatching. A man, in civilian clothes staggered into the street, blood bright on his shoulder, a child struck dumb at his side. Naruto put his hands on both like a bridge between islands and shoved them into a doorway. Just as a kunai took the wood where the man's neck had been. He tracked back along the angle without thinking and saw a sound nin perched on a thatched roof with an arm cocked for another throw. "Don't," Naruto said, and Corona cracked the air like a handclap. The nin flinched and flubbed the throw. The kunai cut a clothesline and a dozen shirts committed to flight. Naruto used the swinging fabri C for cover and sprinted the wall up to the roof edge. The nin met him with the polite brutality of professionals. Naruto learned 2 things within 3 heartbeats. The man wasn't above average and Naruto didn't have time to make this neat. He made 3 clones and sent one directly in, knowing it would die. He sent the second to goad, the third to pull. The real Naruto drove his foot into the Ma's hip when his weight went a half inch too far forward. Bones argued with roof tile. The nin went down. Naruto wanted to be noble. He didn't have the luxury. He left the man breathing and took his pouch. "Hey," a calm voice said behind him. "You." Naruto turned with his hands up and blinked at the blonde woman in cloud colors, her hair pulled back, her face an unflappable line. She held a sword in one hand and nothing in the other. Which was somehow worse. "Samui," she said, as if this clarified everything. "You're the leaf brat with the light thing." "Wow," Naruto said. "Rumors in Konoha travel faster than rumors." "I'm stationed here as an observer," Samui said, eyes scanning past him with the steady attention of a person whose opinions did not speed up under pressure. "Observation says you are being hunted. Join the club." Quote. She jerked her chin toward the market, where smoke made the air an ugly yellow and a sprawl of canvas threatened to catch. "Your weird tricks mess with visibility. I prefer innovative, but yes." Quote. "Good." She strode past him toward the market as if she were walking into an appointment. "Do it to help me cut wind lanes." "You're very demanding for a stranger," Naruto muttered, but he followed. A cart of oranges had overturned. The fruit made the street look like it had sprouted blistered suns. People ran like they were moving through syrup. The smoke rolled low and lazy. "Wanting to suffocate. Umbra here," Samui said, tapping a bare patch of cobble with the toe of her sandal. "And there, where the alley bends." Naruto threw the screen precisely where she pointed. The shadow-thin veil made edges slur. Samui shifted her sword and, this would have been beautiful on a clearer day, drew 3 cuts at just the right height. Wind slid into the lanes the umbra created and rose. A clean column punching through the smother. The smoke found the sky and left the mouths of old people and babies alone. Naruto grinned bright in the ugly light. "I like you." Samui didn't smile and still somehow smiled. "We can be friends if we're alive after lunch." Cloth snapped. Somewhere overhead, glass broke. A half-collapsed awning groaned and fell. Naruto dove for a girl tripping under its shadow and barely caught her by the back of the shirt before the canvas and beam slammed down. He didn't think. He shoved Syzygy into being as if the alley itself had made a second light source out of spilled oil. He staggered a foot to the left and the beam missed his ankle by a polite whisper. He set the girl in her mother's arms and didn't stay for thanks. "You couldn't. The world would eat you while you listened." "Team?" Samui asked, as if she had to be sure before she committed to the next improvised map. "Somewhere," Naruto said, because the answer was true and unhelpful. "If you see a girl with eyes like the moon and a guy with a stick up his." Samui held up a hand. "Later." Everything turned. There are moments that teach you what a village is. Naruto learn. Edit on the rooftop when the desert roared. Sand poured into Konoha like a wave through a broken seawall. He could taste it. He could hear it even under the screaming. He could feel the killing intent. Like a weather change, and it was hungry, lonely, and all wrong. The air went colder, not because of temperature but because of memory. The moon dragged itself from behind a boil of gray cloud even though it was day. Gaara, Naruto said. His voice came out low like he'd gargled gravel. Samui's eyes flicked to him. You know him. Kind of, Naruto said, already moving. City tour later. He ran. Rooftops the way some people pray. Breath as a litany, feet as punctuation. The storm built toward the center, not the tower where the Hokage had set his will against the traitor who had been a student in a different life. But the marketplace where moonlight shouldn't be and sand shouldn't sing. Naruto landed on a cornice and saw him. Gaara stood in the street like a monument nobody had asked for. Sand burned around him in a halo, carving the air into a place where other people couldn't breathe. His eyes were bottomless and childish and older than the village, and the thing inside him was pressing its face to the window. Hey, Naruto shouted, because subtlety didn't move some people. Red Tanuki, over here. Sasuke shot Naruto a look that was half ghastly from the roof across the way. Subtle, he mouthed. Shut up. Naruto mouthed back, and then immediately had to move because the sand turned in his direction like a dog finding a scent and went for his legs. He hit it with Corona, a short, bright temper. The sand flinched but didn't erase. He felt it, the cohesion loosening for a breath, not gone, not broken, just less certain of itself. Hinata, he shouted without taking his eyes off the boy surrounded by a drowning desert. Anchor me. Her answer came as a hand finding his elbow from behind, gentle as always and strong as a vow. Here, Temari, Naruto yelled, because this was a day for unlikely allies and the gods of the wind were never more than a fan's breadth away in her hands. Give me a lane, make your own, she yelled back from a rooftop to his left with false annoyance and absolute precision. Then she snapped her fan, and the wind she raised wasn't a gust, it was a corridor. The smoke rolled aside, the dust lifted, and the line between Naruto and Gaara beck. Aim a coin gleam path he understood with his new, feral sense. He took it. Sasuke's step didn't carry him far. The lighting was wrong, the shadows frantic. It bumped him forward like a shoulder in a crowd. It was enough to get within shouting distance without losing his ankles. Gaara, Naruto said again, softer because now he could. It's loud in there, I know. The sand froze in a rim around him, a crown with sharp ideas. Gaara's head tilted. You could hear the voice behind his eyes even if it didn't cross his mouth. Kill them, kill him, he wants to take us. You're alone in a crowd, Naruto said, hands open. Posture saying I will be stupid if you need me to be. It sucks, but I'm telling you there's a trick. Trick, Gaara whispered. His own voice sounded surprised by itself. You don't have to be the only thing you are, Naruto said. He had not practiced this. He had not thought it and put it away for later. He said it because it was true and because if you talk long enough, sometimes the air hears you. You can add, not subtract. The sand shuddered, a shiver that ran through the whole body of it. The thing in Gaara bared its teeth at the idea of math. Shut up, Gaara said. And Naruto didn't think for a second the words were meant for him. Shut up, shut. The sand lunged. Naruto burned Corona exactly as much as he could without blinding himself. The ring in his eye tightened. Hinata's hand on his arm steadied the part of him that wanted to make everything bright just so it would be simple. He parried with an empty palm, the way Iruka had taught him to deflect a cattail reed so it doesn't break, and the sand slipped around him like a tide around a stubborn rock. Wind, Temari called, and made it without being asked. She carved the edge off the sand's bite. Sasuke's shuriken found clean arcs in the lanes she cleared. Sakura's voice somewhere to the right counted someone else's breathing and kept them from dying. Naruto. Samui again, practical as a ledger. She flung a smoke bomb that blossomed cool and white, not to hide them but to make the light gentle. It dulled the sun's knives. Naruto's headache flinched. He stepped forward until he saw the spot under Gaara's eye where the skin was thinner. He didn't grin. He didn't make jokes. He lowered his voice because some things shouldn't be shouted. I'm not taking anything from you, he said. I'm leaving a door open. Gaara trembled. The sand surged and fell. The killing intent sawed and then snapped thin, and Naruto watched as a boy who had only ever been a weapon took one step toward being a person and fell to his knees because it hurt to change. What are you doing? Gaara whispered, and this time it was to Naruto. Being annoying, Naruto said, and finally let himself smile. My specialty. The sand subsided like a wild animal unpracticing itself. Not gone. Sleeping with one eye open. Temari stood with her fan on her shoulder and her mouth a thin line, not of disapprove, but of a kind of pride that was a cousin to exasperation. Don't make me like you, she called. It cramps my style. Too late, Naruto called back, and the grin he got for it was much rarer than the sun. The moment broke because the village wasn't a story that paused. A scream knifed down from the eastern quarter, thin and high. Naruto's head snapped toward it and the world went strange again, not in the way of heat or light, but in the way a room gets cold when someone who means harm walks through the door. The pale hand moved inside the invasion like a knife in a cloth. Naruto didn't see them first. Hinata did. She stiffened and her fingers tightened on his elbow with a warning his whole body understood. Lanterns, she said. 3. Make that 5, Samui added, calm. And 2 who think they're invisible. Cute, Temari said, and flicked her fan into a lazy open. Wind picked up the fog of smoke and spun it, briefly revealing 5 men in plain armor stepping out of a weaver's alley with the soft-footed certainty of people who practiced this part more than any other. The leader had a scar through his top lip and a face that made you think of old oaths and fresh paper cuts. His eyes found Naruto and did not move. We talk again, he said. Away from your friends. Hard pass, Naruto said, already moving to spoil their geometry. He didn't let them set the lattice. He darted toward the leftmost lantern just as it hit the cobbles, umbra flickering, then dying as the seal sucked the shadow flat. He swore and aborted the shove that would have cost him his vision. The leader gestured, and 2 of his men slipped past Temari and Samui the way water slips through fingers and made for Hinata. Naruto didn't think. He slung a clone between Hinata and the nearest man and body-checked the second. The man's hand slid toward his face with cruel economy. Hinata's palm met the wrist and did something small and precise. The hand forgot what to be. Don't touch him, she said, not loud. Dangerous. Stand down. The leader snapped, as if Hinata were a soldier under his command who'd misunderstood the order. Or what? Naruto said, but then he saw it, the way the light around the second lantern bent wrong and disappeared, the way the seal killed what he had learned to love. Anger came up in him stupid as ever. He wanted to take the ring in his eye and shove it into totally Tai just to watch their careful calm burn. Don't, Hinata said, breath and word and plea all in one. She put her palm between his shoulder blades where the cord in him pulled too tight. Not alone. He didn't. He wanted to. He didn't. Samui moved like a door closing. She stepped into a pale hand operative's shoulder and turned her sword in a cut that made no sound. The man reeled back, surprised Obi hurt by someone he hadn't accounted for. Temari watched the lanterns like a mathematician considering a problem with too many givens. Naruto, she said, almost bored. 2 on the left eat your tricks. The one by the barrel, maybe not. Quote, he didn't ask how she knew. He trusted. He spun, slammed his foot into the barrel, not to break it, but to slosh the brackish water across the seal. The ink hissed, the lines swam, and for a breath the null field rippled. Now, Sakura yelled from nowhere and everywhere, and Naruto understood he wasn't the only one who could count to 3 when people were in the way of death. Umbra's scream lapped over the rippling patch and made a blurring river. Temari's wind carved the river a deeper bed. Sasuke's kick took a lantern clean off the cobble and into a PR. Odu's stall where a dozen furious cabbages decided to be part of history. The leader didn't curse. He set his jaw in a way that told you what he did with disappointment. He reached into his cloak and drew something that wasn't a kunai. A seal knife, thin, shivering lines etched along the flat. Naruto felt his skin try to crawl away from it. Contain, the man said, almost gentle. Or bury. You keep saying that, Naruto said. Did your god write it on your hand so you don't forget? We don't have gods, the man said, pushing forward through the river. Temari and Naruto had dared to cut, only work. He came for Naruto with the certainty of a scalpel's path. Naruto wouldn't win a clean exchange. He didn't try. He let the man's weight commit, then stepped wrong on purpose, heel sliding on smashed orange. Torso twisting late, and let the blade enter the space where he had been. He drove his elbow into the man's ribs and felt an old injury there, a hitch in an inhale that had never healed right. Breathe, Naruto said, too angry for mercy and too Naruto for cruelty, and slammed him into the cart so the knife stuck in wood and not in anyone softer. Hinata's voice changed. Naruto, move. He didn't ask why. He dropped. Chusenbon stitched the air where his neck would have been. They thudded into the post behind him and sang. This wasn't pale hand work. This was something else. Someone else. The masked figure on the roof across the street looked like a sketch after rain. Lines blurred, edges refusing to be crisp. Hunter Nin masked the color of snow in shadow. The tilt of the head reminded Naruto unreasonably of a mirror after fog. Not you, the masked one said to the pale hand, airy as a needle slipping into the skin. Not yet. Haku, Naruto breathed, before his rational mind could slap his mouth. Memory broke like a wave. Ice mirrors and a cold bridge, choices too heavy for young hands. The masked head twitched a hair. It was not a denial. The pale hand leader's eyes cut oured the new arrival with a dislike tempered by practicality. He made a little flick of fingers and his men fell back, reweaving their formation without the third lantern. The masked shinobi didn't follow. The white mask turned to Naruto and tilted, barely, like an apology made out of air. Don't get caught, the voice inside the mask said, and the figure leapt, a swallow darting into smoke. The leader reclaimed his knife from the wood with that same polite economy. We will speak again, he said, as if he had just bumped Naruto in a bakery line. You should change your script, Naruto said. This one's boring. Boredom is safe, the man said. You will learn to love it. He put 2 fingers to his lips and whistled, not loud. His men dissolved into alleyways and doorframes and the kind of quiet civilians leave for people who don't need it. Temari snapped her fan shut with a loud clap because silence that smug needed to be slapped. Do all your bad boyfriends join the same clubs? She asked Naruto, folding the fan so the lacquer caught ugly light and made it pretty. I am not dating the lantern cult, Naruto said. Temari said, unconvinced. The ground shuddered as if the village itself had clenched. A roar rolled across rooftops, not a beast, not whined, something older, broader. For a blink, everyone in the street looked up the same way. On the tower, purple fire shivered and blew outward like a candle pinched. Orochimaru's laugh carried without effort. The third Hokage's chakra rose like a wall. Naruto's mouth went dry. I have to. You have to not die, Samui said evenly, catching his sleeve for exactly 1 heartbeat. The old man's fight isn't yours. Everything's mine, Naruto said, not meaning it and meaning all of it. He's my Hokage. Samui released him. He ran not toward the tower. Between them and it was a net of fights that would eat even Kakashi alive, but toward the people whose screams were voices he recognized, who would stop screaming if he held a wall for them. The next hours were a blur that would return to him years later when he drank tea alone and his hands shook and he didn't know why. He was hands, then, and feet, and the small choices you make when you belong to a village. Pull the woman from under the beam. Leave the man with the broken leg to Anbu because a child is drowning in smoke. Say yes when Shikamaru mutters, eat a runner, and then refuse because Sakura needs a lifter more and you are the only one built for it right now. Karen showed up righteously furious in a street full of falling sparks. She didn't announce herself. She planted a palm on Naruto's chest, swore at the feel of his pulse in a way that indicated relief disguised as offense, and then knelt by a man bleeding out under a shattered sign. Don't look at me like I'm a traitor. Karen snapped at a Leaf Chunin who had lifted a kunai at her because unfamiliar uniforms meant bad math. I'm a medic with a grudge. Make yourself useful and hold pressure. She stitched the man's life together with chakra that smelled like ozone and iron and didn't look at Naruto until she had the artery quiet. You look like you tried to eat a light bulb, she said, not kind, not unkind. Don't do that. I'll add it to my list, Naruto said, dizzy with gratitude at the sight of a familiar Uzumaki face and the simple, abrasive competence it wore. Why are you here? Orochimaru forgot to tell me one small thing, she said, tying a knot one-handed. That I am not a disaster. I decided to disagree. Where's Tsunade? Never mind, you don't know. I'll find her. Go be stupid where your stupidity matters. When night finally remembered to fall, it came down in a sheet instead of a curtain, fast and rude. Lanterns, real ones, not null cages, sprang alive across SS streets that had spent all their courage by noon and were now surviving on spite. Naruto climbed a narrow stair to a rooftop that had not been on fire for 20 minutes and sat down because if he didn't he would cry. Hinata sat beside him. She didn't speak. Her sleeve brushed his and said everything he couldn't yet. Below them, the barrier that had surrounded the tower failed all the way. O rock! Himaru fled with a smile that would make snakes blush. The third Hokage sat very still in a posture you see in old statues and funerals. The cheer that rose was jagged. Relief and terror do not produce clean sounds. A man in plain armor stood in the street below their roof and looked up as if he knew exactly where Naruto was. He wasn't the scar-lipped leader. He was younger, face too beautiful for the work. He lifted his hand and made a little gesture as if to suggest a drink later. Hinata's hand tightened on Naruto's sleeve. Don't, she whispered. Not tonight. He didn't. Kakashi found them. In that thin hour when the village stops screaming not because it is finished but because it is exhausted. He looked as if someone had erased and redrawn him 3 times. He crouched next to Naruto. ND rubbed him roughly between the shoulders twice, like a father who didn't like to be caught being gentle. You did good work, he said through his mask. Don't get cocky. Don't get drunk. Do sleep. The rest is for people with hats. Naruto looked at the sky because he couldn't look at the tower. Was he braver than he had to be? Kakashi said. Stubborn too. You'd have liked him better if he'd told you a dirty joke before he died. He stood. Eat something salty with the tea. Your chakra smells stupid. They slept in shifts on a floor that had been a shop that morning. The lamplight made shadows that were kind and round. Naruto dreamed of a ring that burned his eyes in the day and cooled them at night, and a hand on his back with a seal pressed to his spine that let him breathe inside the brightness instead of drowning. He woke to a voice he didn't know and somehow recognized. Be at the south gate at dawn, it said, quiet and resonant despite being a whisper. If you want a whey tea. Oh, live with that eye without it eating you. Hinata's breath stirred beside him. She hadn't woken. He sat up. The shop was empty except for sleeping bodies and the smell of tea and wood ash. He went the door and opened it onto a street that had been cleaned already, because Konoha believed in proof of life. A man leaned against a post with his arms crossed. Scar lip. The pale hand commander. Hi. S gaze met Naruto's and was not a threat. It was an invitation with knives inside. Leash. Naruto said softly. Neither leash nor graveyard, the man said. His face did not know how to smile. Anchor. Naruto looked back at the room where his friends slept. Hinata's hair spilled over her shoulder like ink over paper. Temari had fallen asleep sitting upright against the counter, fan on her lap. Uth opened a fraction as if surprised by her own exhaustion. Samui was not in the room. She was likely already awake somewhere useful. Karen snored like she had never snored politely in her life. Dawn, Naruto said, not agreeing. Naming a time. The man inclined his head and stepped into the alley like a drawn line being erased. He left behind a thin smell of old ink and river mud. Naruto shut the door gently and sat back down. He folded his knees up to his chest and put his forehead there and breathed through the complicated ache in his head and the simple one in his chest. Hinata stirred and put a hand on his back without opening her eyes. Here, she mumbled. Yeah, he whispered. Here, far away, across the sea and the mountain and the roads that had not yet remembered how to be safe, a priestess stood in a temple without windows and watched a candle gutter at noon. The ring that formed on the wall did not belong to her rights. She saw a boy with an eye like an argument and a man with a scar telling him to choose between chains, and she rubbed the heel of her hand against her sternum as if the pressure there could be smoothed. If it completes, Shion said into no one's ear, the sky will dim. Her acolyte made a sign against the evil eye. Xian wanted to laugh because the sign was wrong and the evil was older than symbols. She didn't. She lit a second candle from the first and put them together so the flame doubled. The ring on the wall shivered. The temple hummed. Send a message, she told the wind as if it were an old friend. Tell him we have a way to look at the sun without going blind. At dawn, the village was pale and brave. Naruto stood at the south gate with dust in his hair and mischief in his mouth and a hand pressed to his spine where Hinata had left a seal-shaped warmth without a seal. The pale hand commander waited with his men in a small mercy, no lanterns open, no knives drawn. Samui stood 20 paces away with her arms folded, a witness with a spine. Tamari whistled a tuneless little insult that somehow sounded like worry. Karen scratched a mosquito bite on her ankle and eyed the men like a cat deciding whether to bite ankles in turn. Show me your anchor, Naruto said. If this is a leash I'm going to kick you in the teeth. Perigi, the man said. He lifted a coil of braided paper seals inked in a hand that didn't shake. More title than tether. Someone you trust must hold the countermark. Otherwise it is a choke. Naruto glanced at Hinata. She didn't blush this time. She didn't need to. She walked to him with her chin level and her palm steady. On your back, she said. He took his shirt off without making a joke. The morning was cool, the sun still kind. Hinata pressed the seal flat between his shoulder blades. It warmed. The ring in his eye turned slow, as if considering change instead of chasing it. Breathe, she said. He did. The pale hand man layered the braided seal above Hinata's palm and spoke a word that felt like a knot when you pull all the ends at once. Something in Naruto's chest pulled tight and then eased. The world went sharp at the edges but not bright enough to hurt. Seconds, the man said. No more. In those seconds, you are what you want to be. After, you will hurt unless that hand stays. Hinata's hand stayed. Don't make me regret playing nice, the man added, because he couldn't help himself. Naruto didn't smile. He turned toward the rising sun and opened the eclipse just a little. The pain came, yes, but the anchor held it in a place he could survive. A band of shadow cut across a sea. Oin of light and the world breathed with him instead of trying to swallow him. He felt possible. Okay, he said, voice low and bright as a blade. Let's go hunt a god. Above them, somewhere beyond blue, something with a perihelion eye blinked and decided the game had gotten interesting enough to stay. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. Pilgrimage to the Dark Temple. They left at first light, when the villa GE looked washed and brave and the sun was still soft enough to forgive mistakes. Kakashi didn't give a speech. He put a packet into Naruto's hand, paper sealed with patient ink and the weight of a promise, and said, deliver this to the priestess. Try not to be on fire when you hand it over. Can't make promises, Naruto said. You can, Kakashi said, you just won't. He flicked a glance past Naruto to the people he wasn't officially sending and nodded once. Don't let him be the only idiot. Rude, Naruto muttered. Accurate, Tamari said, already walking. The road south braided itself through hills and pine until pines became black fir and the smell of sap thinned into old stone. Xian met them at a shrine with no door, dressed in white that had seen travel, hair pinned with a single amethyst bead. The bead caught light like a warning. You came, she said, surprised and not. You asked, Naruto said, and held the packet out. She didn't take it, not yet. Her eyes were on his. The ring behind his iris pulsed. A small ache that recognized something in the priestess's gaze, a familiarity with staring at things you're not supposed to survive. Do not open that, Xian said to the group at large. Wasn't going to, Naruto lied, offended. Karen snorted. Samui's mouth twitched in a way that might have been a smile if it weren't so private. They climbed all day and half the night tea. Hero a mountain pass that took light and made it thin. The wind there had teeth. The farther they went, the less honest shadows became. Hinata's Byakugan mapped edges Naruto's I didn't trust yet. Tamari walked at the head like she'd always owned altitude. Karen drifted a little behind them, surprise riding every rock with her sensors' attention even when she looked bored of the earth. At sunset, the path narrowed to a spine with a drop on one side and black trees gathered like an audience on the other. Xian stopped at a stone marker carved with a circle cut by a line. Her fingers hesitated. Ed near the sign the way you hesitate near a hot stove. Then she touched it. From this point, she said, voice lower as if not to wake something that could read words, torches will punish you. Punish, Naruto repeated. Some corridors are built for dusk, Shion said. Not darkness, not daylight, like a throat built for singing, force the wrong sound through and it tears. I can make dusk, Naruto said, too eager. The ache behind his eyes flared once, chastising. He swallowed. Carefully, Hinata put a hand on his wrist. Angles, not pretty spots, she reminded him, and her eyes were a little shy and very certain. They went on. The first of the temple's outworks appeared like a lie the mountain told. A slab of stone where no stone like it belonged, its face polished so fine it was almost sky. Lines cut it in precise arcs, all converging on a circle the size of a man's open hand. Naruto stepped close, saw his own face ghosted there, and the ring inside his eye held still like a cat looking at a pond. Lanterns down, Shion said. Temari. Dust. Temari didn't argue. She flicked the end of her fan at the ground and raised a soft cloud that settled in a thin sheet over the slab. Patterns bloomed, not lines of ink but the negative of them, a language of absence. Hinata's gaze sharpened. Tiles that want weight, she murmured, tracing with 2 fingers in the air. And ones that want none. Like chakra points on a giant's foot. Obsessed with feet now, Naruto asked, because jokes kept his hands from shaking. Don't be weird, Hinata said, and then colored because she'd said it without stuttering. Because she'd said it like breathing, because every small victory felt like a real one these days. They moved on the slab in a line, Naruto planting where Hinata's nod gave him permission. Temari breathing dust into seams to show steps that would otherwise not exist. Samui paced at their backs with sword ready and comments saved. Karen felt the air as if it were water and said, flatly. The corridor ahead bends the way light bends when it lies. Ritual dusk, Shion said. We'll need it. Naruto stood at the threshold and let Umbra's screen peel off his hands like shadow-touched gauze. Not a storm, not a brag, just a soft slide across the edges of everything that took noon and filed it down to evening. The corridor accepted it. The hair at Naruto's nape settled. Ahead, KN. Ives tucked themselves away with a mechanical sigh because the light they'd been told to punish had been made polite. They passed through a hall of bells that did not ring so much as think about it. He bells hung from threads that looked like spider silk and were not. Naruto could feel each one as a small gravity of attention, each waiting for the lie of light to twitch. He moved like a man wading through the memory of a river. Hinata's breath counted in his ear. Temari's wind didn't push, it leaned. Karen whispered a seal under her breath to smooth the way the air moved around them. Samui moved last, unfist when a thread brushed her shoulder without ringing because she knew exactly where her body was in space and always had. At the stair that switched back on itself like a serpent swallowing its tail. They met opposition that breathed. The pale hand elites wore no symbols on their clothes, they wore them in their posture, their patience. The braided null seals on their forearms hummed like a song with one note. The leader wasn't with them. These moved like men who didn't need a face to line around. Stand down, the foremost said, and the words didn't ask. They stated the weather. This ground is not yours. It's not yours either, Temari said coolly, because she could not help poking at people who took up space as if rent were free. Containment writ covers the temple, the man said, not looking away from Naruto. You will leave the eye. Boy, Naruto said, not I have other parts. They're great. Humor is shield, Samui observed, and then to the elites, if you have business with deities. You're late. The deity sent a scout. Eyes flicked to her. Respect there. Brief and exact, because she was Kumo and carried herself like an answer. We know, the man said. Our lattice is set deeper. You are walking into a contest you cannot even see. Been doing that since we were 12, Naruto said. He didn't reach for Corona. The braided seals would drink it. He didn't reach for Umbra. The corridor's dusk was his friend, not a weapon. He settled into himself the way Iruka had taught him. Knees easy, chest loose, chin tipped a little down as if to keep rain from his eyes. They came at him without malice, pure craft. The first man's strike was a small, perfect circle around Naruto's guard. Naruto parried not with a block, but with a misplacement, he turned. His wrist laid and let the man hit a body that wasn't there anymore. The second man cut under, heel scything for Naruto's calf. Hinata's foot slid where his would-be-in was, and the strike clapped harmlessly into her soul. She tapped the attacker's knee twice with a frown a sister reserves for a brother who won't sit at dinner, and the knee stopped obeying politely. Karen's chain, red seal thread, woven with something older than her temper, sang out and snagged a braided null seal, then tightened with a hiss. The man's seal coughed. The hum that made Naruto's teeth hurt dropped half a pitch. Uzumaki, one elite said, recognizing the bind. Obviously, Karen said, offended. Try not to breathe on the thread unless you want your lungs to itch for a week. Samui's sword whispered through the small places people forget exist between ribs and elbow. She never left her feet. She never raised her voice. Tamari watched the corridor's air like a diagram and snapped the fan once to move nothing, not to blow, but to draw a line for Naruto's body to follow. He followed, and felt stupidly happy to be doing so. They didn't kill the elites. They made them decide to delay. When the men fell back, it wasn't because they were beaten. It was because they were mathematicians, and the equation had shifted toward losing too much for too little. The last one touched his forearm seal with a warning that was not entirely for Naruto's benefit. Beware the floating hall, he said. Our lattice fails there. Something else eats it. Is this the part where you look helpful so you can feel better about being a problem? Naruto asked. It is the part where I prefer you alive when our commander speaks again, the man said, and vanished into a seam in the wall like a coin into a magician's palm. See, Tamari murmured. Bad boyfriends, clubs. Quote, please stop, Naruto begged. The inner temple smelled like stone and old water. Shion kept her hands close to her chest and her robe clear of snags as if respect were a physical act. They entered a hall where the walls carried paintings in thin gold leaf that told a story without faces. Circles within circles, lines crossing them, the sun wearing a crown of black. The moon painted as a coin with flame licking it. Kakashi's packet was for this room. Shion set it in a dish of dark metal, and the seal Kakashi had used, patient and strict, unfolded like some thing done by a man who liked his tea bitter. Inside, a coil of paper braided with hair as pale as cloud. Jiraiya's, Karen said, surprised into softness before she could sneer. He must have had it from gods know when. Shion's hands didn't shake when she lifted it. This is the anchor we need, she said. But it is wrong for a temple made of stone. Wrong how? Naruto asked, voice a little hoarse. It assumes a floor that does not move, Shion said. That's a lot of floors, Tamari said dryly. Not moving is their thing. Wait, Naruto said, as the skin above his heart tried to read a memory he didn't own. What floor moves? Shion looked up. The ceiling was a map of the sky. Parts of it were missing. Not damaged. Absent. As if space had been cut out and set aside. The annex, Shion said. They lifted it. The floating hall. They, Hinata echoed. Her eyes stayed sober. They, the pale hand. They, is the thing that hunts you, Shion said, and her voice didn't shake now either. The right misfired twice before it learned their hands. The first time, the lamps flared high and hard, and a ring of heat tried to pry Naruto's eyelids open. He flinched and the shadow broke. The second time, the lamps guttered, and the room went too dark. Blades whispered and someone's sleeve came away with a thin-cut temerize. She looked at the line on her arm and said, rude, as if to a sibling. Ritual dusk, Shion said again, as if speaking to the room's temper. Not less, not more. I've got the less, Naruto said. I don't have the more. You have us, Hinata said. She lifted her palm. Together, they built dusk by committee. Tamari lofted a fine dust into the air that softened light without choking it. Karen marked small Uzumaki binds at the corners of the room that slowed downward drafts, making the candles breathe easy. Samui stood near the door with blade ready in a stillness that told trouble to wait its turn. Shion's hands moved in shapes that were not signs, and not seals, the movements of a woman whose body had memorized passages from a book written on a place and not on paper. Naruto let Umbra slip off his fingers like ink the room wanted to drink. When the dusk settled, Shion set the braided anchor on Naruto's back where Hinata's hand had been at the gate. If Hinata felt a pang, If Naruto did, neither made a face. Hinata pressed her palm over it as if to say, I am still the hand. Breathe, Shien said, and Naruto did. Open it. Not all the way. He opened Umbra to the room the way you open a window and not a door. The anchor drank the panic that usually spiked his nerves and served him only the geometry. The ache of light behind his eyes condensed into a coin and stayed there. He exhaled without flinching. Seconds, Shien reminded him. Seconds, Hinata echoed, the countermark. He closed it. The anchor cooled. Something loosened in his chest he hadn't known was knotted. Perigi, Karen said softly, fingers on the braided paper, eyes calculating. It pulls you close enough to not fly apart. Will it hold if the floor moves? Naruto asked. Karen looked at Shien. Shien looked at the ceiling map with holes in it. Neither lied. We'll find out, Shien said. They found out 2 corridors later. The floating annex did not look like magic from the outside. It looked like a courtyard had been cut from the mountain and wedged in the sky. The air around it bled. Not like heat, not like water, like a lens. The hair on Naruto's arms stood, and not just because the wind was strange. There were no ropes. There were no bridges. There was an arch with no stones under it, and a door you could open if you could walk where there was no floor. Absolutely not, Tamari said. Shien's hand hovered over a stack of prayer boards. She looked at Naruto as if asking permission to put the question to him she would put to a sacrifice. He nodded because it required a person to nod, and he was the one here who had traded with angles. Seconds, Hinata repeated, for both of them now. I'm with you. Naruto took 3 breaths and opened Umbra only enough to see. The annex hung from a point that was not above it. Lines curled from that point to the edges of the world and back again as if the sky had been hooked over a peg. The path across wasn't a path. It was an agreement you could make with the air if you put your foot down in the right place with the right rhythm. I can try, he said, but if it eats me, tell Kakashi I want a refund. On what? Tamari asked. Everything. He grinned because he needed the grin more than he needed a plan. Ready. Hinata's hand pressed to the anchor on his back. The world's color went a little hungrier, a little more honest. Now, she said, and he stepped. It was like walking on the red side of a leaf, a surface that shouldn't hold a body and did because the leaf believed in itself. Naruto let his weight be a rumor. Hinata moved with him, palm steady, eyes wide and clear. Karen went next, R.O. Pei seal around her waist to the arch and back, muttering, I swear to every dead Uzumaki if you fall I will yank you up by your hair. Tamari followed, and because she was Tamari, she made it look like a stroll. Samui came last, steps precise, because she always arrived exactly when and where she intended to. Halfway across, the world changed its mind. Not the annex, the air behind them. A kunai sang from the far arch, then took a curve that no wind knows. It swam through a path that wasn't there and was, a neat arc around Karen's cheek that didn't leave a line until it was past her and then see. Oot her skin as if time had made up its mind late. Karen froze. Hinata's hand tightened. Temari's eyes snapped up to a point no one else but Naruto could see. The man who stepped into view at the far RCH moved like a long shadow deciding where to fall. He wore no symbols that would make him a country. His hair was colorless as frost. His eyes, no, his eye, because the other closed when it didn't nay. Ed to be cruel, held a ring inside a ring, not black, not white. The air near it bent. Tenma, Shien said very quietly, as if she had expected a rumor and gotten a person. Her palms started to shake ND then stopped when she put them together. The man inclined his head a fraction at his name the way people do when reminded of their job title. He did not look at Shien. He looked at Naruto, not at his face, at his eye. As if greeting a colleague you intend to undercut in a meeting. You walk interesting lines, Tenma said. His voice was pleasant the way glass is pleasant if you hope to throw it and hear it break. The eclipse. Naruto's mouth went dry, which was a stupid evolutionary choice given how often he needed to talk when he was terrified. You're blocking the door, he said. Yes, Tenma said, as if answering a riddle. Come take it. Tamari snapped her fan. The gust didn't push Tenma. It bent around him, a complicated path that came back on itself with a neatness that made Naruto's stomach drop. Don't, Samui said, to no one in particular, which meant everyone. He's playing with the distance between us. Karen's cheek bled a polite line. She licked it with annoyance that had fierce taste at the bottom. He's pulling chakra along sight lines. If you look at him, he drinks you. Rude, Temari said. I thought Suna men were thirsty. Hear that a lot, Naruto said. Both of you, Samui cut, and they shut up. Tenma smiled like he had a favorite page in a book. He looked at Naruto and the ring behind Naruto's eye felt tugged, a small, private tide. The anchor on his back held. Hinata's hand steadied the place where fear was sensible and trying to be louder. I would like to see your totality, Tenma said conversationally, as if asking someone to take off their boots in a foyer. Buy me dinner, Naruto said. Take me somewhere nice. Tenma glanced up as if doing the math on nice, and found no relevant numbers. No, he decided. He didn't lunge. He didn't flare. He just changed something, and the annex floor when Naruto stepped toward him tried to be the wall instead. Naruto's weight went wrong. He would have fallen, forward, sidewise, if Hinata hadn't pressed two fingers into the bunched muscle under his shoulder blade and said, back, quiet like a thread. The anchor breathed and took the weight and handed Naruto his balance like a cup. Thank you, Naruto said, to Hinata, to the anchor. To the person who had not truly intended him to come this far and somehow also had. Seconds, she whispered. Tenma drew 2 fingers together, and the space between them gathered light the way water gathers in a cupped palm. He flicked the gathered brightness like a person flicks water at a cat, amused to see it jump. The flick hit Temari's fan. The lacquer shuddered. Temari's arm went briefly numb. Okay, she said through her teeth. New game. Samui shifted her stance and did something you'd miss if you didn't know what efficiency looks like. She cut air. Not a dramatic sweep, a small vertical. A tick that made a place for Karen to throw a seal-sutured chain that might matter. Karen threw it with a curse and the chain hit a point near Tenma's shoulder where a lens existed and didn't. It stuck. Not to him, but to the point in space he was using like a third hand. Tenma's eye narrowed, almost a shrug. He twitched, a negligible motion, and the chain SL. It off the point as if the universe had been oiled. Shion spoke a word then that made the temple's breath catch. She set 2 small prayer boards at her feet and 2 more at the far arch and 1 in the air between. And the air did not spit it out. The boards hung as if someone had put a small table there to set tea on. Perigi, she said, to Naruto, to Hinata, to the room. Anchor. Seconds, Hinata said, pulse under Naruto's palm strong and steady. Her hand pressed harder. Now, Naruto opened both eyes all the way. Not flagrant, not like dying, like a knife drawn from a sheath and held flat, not edge first. The eclipse opened in a ring and the world's glare did not slice him because the anchor in Hinata's hand and Shion's boards made the light listen before it bit. Tenma's perihelion eye contracted in an answering curiosity. His mouth twitched, the first expression his face had risked that wasn't either boredom or a laboratory note. Good, he said. The annex floor wanted to be a wall again. Naruto led it. He ran the wall because it was a floor for him now. Temari carved a lane with her fan that wasn't a gust so much as a decision, and Naruto took it. Karen flung a half-finish. D-seal that had no business working and yet did, binding the little lens between Tenma's fingers just long enough for Samui to step and cut for the joint. The cut landed because Hinata said now and our hand on Naruto's back said now and Naruto said now with the ring in his eye. Tenma slid aside, laid by a fraction that mattered. Samui's blade left a stripe of blood on a man who was not used to bleeding where he hadn't planned it. Tenma looked at the blood as if it had told him a joke. Interesting, he said, and then he stopped playing. For 2 heartbeats he pulled Horizon toward himself. The sky bent. The floating annex groaned as if it had remembered gravity and did not like the memory. Everyone's balance failed. Temari, Samui, Karen, Shion, Hinata, Naruto, the anchor, the perigi boards, everyone. Because he had taken the idea of down and moved it. Now, Hinata repeated, but this time the word was hoarse because she was saying it against a fall, not a breath. Naruto shoved Shizuji's TEP into the tiniest possible angle and landed on solid that wasn't there a second ago because Shion had put her hand out and made ritual where he needed it and because Temari had flared dust and Becca. Yu's Karen had dared to hook Uzumaki chain through air instead of wood and because Samui had extended a blade that became, for a blink, a rail. Hinata didn't let go. The anchor held. Naruto saw the Lin he needed. The one Tenma wasn't guarding, not because he couldn't, but because it was under his assumption no one silly enough, no one loved enough, would try. He went for Shion. Tenma tried to drink the move before it was finished. To siphon the chakra thread through the sight line he'd coiled around Naruto. The totality flirted with him and he flirted back and both almost got burned. Naruto did not pour more light into the room. He closed a little more of the world instead, a ring narrowing gently until the only path was the one to Shion, and when she stumbled, her prayer boards falling because even faith has weights. He got an arm around her waist and let the fall finish with them together instead of apart. They hit the annex with bruises that had the shape of gratitude. Tenma watched them calmly, thumb brushing the thin line of blood at his collarbone like a man unfamiliar with the maintenance of bodies. Seconds, Hinata gasped, hand trembling where the anchor had cost her more than she wanted Naruto to know. He closed it. The eclipse slid back behind the eyelid of his will, not disarmed, only sheathed. The pain came, as promised. He let it. He would not cry in front of the man who wanted to own his eye. Tenma's gaze considered that, too, the sheathing, the not crying, the press of Hinata's fingers over paper and skin. He tilted his head a fraction. I will take it from you next time, he said. Like he was scheduling a meeting. Bring flowers, Naruto said between his teeth. You're bad company. Company is irrelevant, Tenma said, and then he did that small motion again, the one that moved down. And the annex groaned a second time as if to warn them that they had two choices, leave now or stay forever. Temari, Samui said, and Temari didn't need more. She snapped fan and cut a lane that shouldn't exist and yet did. Karen threw her chain. Shion set a board in the middle of air. Hinata's hand dragged Naruto's feet toward the correct wrongness. They ran. Kuna. I took a path that disagreed with the rules and would have found Naruto's back anyway if a hand like ink on paper hadn't caught his shoulder and held him half a heartbeat between breaths. Ibuki Jiro, he scar-lipped commander, stood at the arch behind them, ribs wrapped tight, eyes narrow with pain and decision. His men bled in quiet ways behind him. He didn't step into the annex. He didn't need to. He threw a null seal cage into a gap Tenma had been using to move his weight and pin nothing in a way that mattered. Go, he said without looking at Naruto. Before you practice stubbornness into death. Naruto didn't thank him. He didn't have the language for enemies who gritted their teeth and held doors. He ran with his people into a corridor that remembered walls and floors and ceilings. ND sucked air like a man who had been underwater too long. Don't stop, Karen said, not because of pursuit, but because of collapse. This place was held up by a man with opinions. They didn't stop until the bell's corridor. Until the dust settled and the ritual dust thinned and Hinata's fingers opened because they had to. Naruto leaned a shoulder into stone and found that the world wobbled less with his eyes closed. You okay? Temari asked, which for her was practically a confession of something. Define, Naruto said, and then let his head hit the wall a little too hard and laughed because. If he didn't he would think about the way Tenma had said next time as if it were a holiday. Don't laugh, Karen snapped, angrier because she was shaking. She put a hand on his chest and knocked once, as if testing for hollow spots. You overdraw and I will personally staple you to a bed. Promises, Naruto said, because habits. Hinata sat very still with her palms flat on her thighs to make the tremor leave slower. When she lifted her gaze to his, her eyes were clear and tired and nearly smiling. Seconds, she repeated, softer now, pleased that they had stolen a few that mattered. The word had become a kind of oath between them. Shion lit a candle with the careful hands of someone who has felt the difference between light as kindness and light as knife. He will come for you at the crossing, she said. He is not a god. He is a man with an eye like a star and a very old hunger. She looked at Naruto as if to commit him to memory for a temple's walls. You are not a god either. Don't try to be. Wasn't planning on it, Naruto said, which was both true and a lie, and he didn't know which part made Hinata squeeze his wrist. They didn't linger. The temple had rearranged its mind twice in one day. A third change would be rudeness. They threaded back through bells and dusk, through slabs that wanted weight and ones that wanted none. At the outer marker, she pressed her fingers to the line through the circle again. And her shoulders loosened when the stone did not argue. Samui took point down the mountain with inconspicuous grace. Temari walked a half-step behind Naruto with a fan flicked idly closed and the kind of banter in her mouth she only used when she decided she might die for you if she had to and would be mad about it the whole time. Karen carried her chain leash on something too large to housebreak. Hinata walked beside Naruto and did not let her hand drift far from the place on his back where the anchor had left its warmth, even through cloth. At the shrine with no door, the wind came down the steps like it had been sent for them. Shion stopped under the lintel and turned to them with a priestess's composure and a woman's grateful exhaustion. She took Kakashi's packet at last, now empty of hair and full of having mattered. "Thank you," she said, "to all of them, to none of them in particular, to the part of the world that let this party be what it was. We have a way. It hurts," Naruto said honestly. "It will," Shion said. "Some days less, Hinata repeated, and Naruto thought that might be the most hopeful sentence he'd ever heard. A courier hawk came out of the failing light and landed on the shrine's low wall like a punctuation mark. Temari twitched the note free and skimmed it, eyes narrowing into something pleased and reluctant. "Sand withdraws," she announced, lip curling like she'd tasted a lemon. "We're called home to a council that will ask why I didn't let you die, and I will say because the village that lets children die is a dumb village." Quote, Naruto said, "You'll miss me. I will miss the opportunity to beat you in the finals," Temari said, and then startled herself by reaching out to flick the edge of Hinata's sleeve. "Don't let him fall through any holes in the sky when I'm not looking." Hinata's smile was small and sharp. "I won't." Samui's message was shorter. "Cloud honors the aid rendered," she said, as if reading off an internal code she'd memorized. "Also, my commanding officer says if you borrow any of our tricks, please put them back where you found them." "I always do," Naruto lied. She held out a fist. He bumped it. The contact was brief and practical and said you were useful in a way metals did not. Karen did not hug so much as invade personal space with hostility. "Drink water," she snapped. "Eat salt. If you see spots, you stop or I will sedate you in a very creative way." "Are you staying?" Naruto asked. She glanced toward the road to Konoha as if Orochimaru am I. GHT pop out of a shrub to complain about her resigning without paperwork. "For a bit," she said. "Until someone with actual authority, Tsunade, gods be weird, tells me to stop bossing you. Then I will ignore her. But I will make a good show of it." Shion lifted her chin at Naruto with a sadness that was not quite sadness. "You will be blind for a day soon," she said, like predicting rain. "Don't be afraid. Ask someone to describe the sunrise." He looked at Hinata without meaning to. She was already nodding, cheeks pink in the cold. "I will," she said. They separated at a crossroads under a maple that had not yet decided to turn. Temari's silhouette shrank along the ridge like the edge of a smile pulled closed. Samui melted into the left-hand path like water taking a groove. Shion returned to steps and shadows. Karen fell in beside Naruto and Hinata because she had already decided where she belonged and would argue with you later if you disagreed. They walked the last mile into Konoha at dusk, which felt like an apology and a promise at once. Lanterns were going up. The village breathed in a way Naruto recognized now, not just exhale after a fight, but a continuing. He felt the weight of the anchor even when it wasn't pressed to him, the way you feel a hand long after it leaves your back. Ibuki Jiro waited near the gate as if he had not moved since they'd left. He had, of course. Why? You could taste field in the set of his shoulders. He didn't bring lanterns this time. He didn't bring knives. He brought a book with a spine cracked by thumb. "You lived," he said, like the punchline to a joke he keeps writing. "Annoyed?" Naruto asked. "Relieved," the man said without ceremony, and Naruto blinked because the honesty came out like a splinter. "You will keep my number. When the daimyo call for a leash, I will show them an anchor. If they insist, I will resign with noise." You could have been a good teacher, Naruto said. I am, Ibuki said. I just don't work at the academy. They stood there for a breath. Two people who had met each other while the world fell sideways and found that neither of them had the right kind of words for the kind of truce they were making. Then Ibuki added, almost as an afterthought. The floating hall is not done with you. Its shape changes when the sky does. Naruto looked up. The first bright points had appeared. For a second he could imagine being a speck that the stars noticed. Good, he said. I like changing shape. He didn't sleep easy that night. When the blind came, it came like a curtain someone else controlled. Panic flared and subsided when Hinata's voice put sunrise into words without making it poetry. She told him about rooftops like boats rocking on a calm sea, about cats owning alleys, about the way light makes even broken windows look like honest work. About old men swearing at new brooms, about a girl with a blue ribbon running because she didn't want to be late, about the particular gold of the academy's bell. It's orange, not gold, he argued. Eyes closed. Shish, she said, and he smiled because her shish was hands and not a gag. By noon the dark thinned. By evening he could see lamps as reasonable circles he didn't hate. By the time the stars argued their slow case, he had his ring tucked back where it belonged, tired and unbroken. He dreamed of a hull that hung from a point not above it, and of a man who held the horizon like a string. And of a word pressed to his back by a palm that would not let him jump alone. In the morning, Kakashi asked for a report and got a story that made his eyebrow lift 3 times. Which was the same as a standing ovation. Sakura made a face at the anchor and then, to Hinata's private pride, asked for instruction on how it worked if someone besides Naruto needed it. Sasuke stared at the wall like the wall had wronged him and then said brusquely, when, which meant when do we go back and when do I get to help and when do you stop nearly dying without me? Tomorrow, Naruto said, because tomorrow was a thing you could aim at without promising a map to it. Above them, the floating hall turned a fraction you could only see if you were trying to draw it by memory. Tenma's eye watched Konoha not like a hawk but like an astronomer, patient and cold. The pale hand wrote letters and burned some of them before the ink dried. Shion put chips of stone in a bowl and told a child's riddle about circles and knives. Tamari trained on a rooftop until her arms shook and then laughed at herself for being mortal. Samui sent a report and cut everything that wasn't relevant, which meant almost all of it. Because what mattered was that a boy with a ring in his eyes had learned to open it without destroying the room. Naruto washed his face at the pump behind Ichiraku. ND stared at his reflection in the wobbling water. The ring flickered, small and stubborn. He tapped his cheek with 2 fingers the way Iruka did when grading papers and said, okay. The sky turned tea, color of a bruise where it meets light. Konoha lit its lanterns anyway. When Naruto closed his eyes, he saw not an ending, but a line drawn across a bright coin that promised another try. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. Totality. The morning of the eclipse rose too clean, like a blade after oil. Konoha had that crisp hush you get after big storms, voices low, brooms working, wood repaired with fresh nails that hadn't learned to squeak yet. Naruto and Hinata met before the sun shook free of the roofs, the training field a gray bowl waiting for color. Seconds, Hinata said softly, palm hovering above the spot between his shoulder blades where the braided paper would lay. She didn't touch yet, she didn't need to. The word settled them. Seconds, Naruto echoed, rolling his shoulders. The ache behind his eyes pulsed, not warning, want. He laughed under his breath at the stubbornness of it. You know, if I ever get good at this, I'm going to pretend I was always good at this. Hinata huffed a little, that quick smile he'd learned to chase but never demand. I'll correct you, kindly. He opened Umbra only as far as her breathing allowed, the world slipping to evening without losing its edges. She slid in, Parhelion palm nudging his first corona into 2 clean beats, one bright, one quiet, until the movement felt like a sentence they'd practiced enough to sound like talking. They broke when the wind changed. Konoha's birds didn't scatter, they fell silent the way crowds do when someone stands. The light sharpened as clouds thinned and then the sky did the opposite of darkening. It went strange. A dog barked exactly once on the far side of the market and then gave up because even dogs know when the day isn't interested in being reasonable. Shion's message reached them as a breath that wasn't a voice. Now. The hall rises. Naruto slung his vest on without tying it and Hinata did the tying because fingers are clumsy when the sky leans. Karen appeared at the gate looking like she'd run a mile and cursed the entire time. She shoved a canteen into Naruto's hands and smacked his chest with the back of her wrist. "Drink," she said. "Salt later. Try not to invent new injuries." Samui was there like a vertical line next to the gate post. "Cloud party trick," she said, offering a folded strip of dark cloth. "Smear this under your eyes when the glare climbs. Won't fix stupid. Will help." "Generous," Naruto said, taking it. A handful of pale hand operatives stepped from a shadow that belonged to the wall and not to them. No lanterns. No spun-up sanctimony. Ibuki Jiro stood in front without armor. Rib wrapped clean and tight under a plain jacket, book in hand, thumb marking a page. "Walk," he said. "Talk as we go." "You didn't bring your cages," Naruto pointed out. Ibuki nodded toward Hinata's hand and the coil of braided seals at her hip. "Because I intend to use yours." He glanced up at the sky like a carpenter measuring a beam. "He's lifting the annex over the marsh. We'll meet him where the horizon gets confused." Tamari was already on the road when they cleared the last of the trees, a green and tan streak with a fan slung across her back and an expression that could cut tile. "San sends regrets. A strongly worded letter to the daimyo, and me," she said, falling into step, breath even. "Try to deserve the political headache." "You came," Naruto said, honestly relieved. She clicked her tongue. "Wind goes where it wants. Also, I left in the middle of a meeting." "Power move," Karen said. "Boring meeting," Tamari said. "And your medic is bleeding and pretending not to." Karen wiped her cheek with her thumb and licked it with intent just to be gross. "I am extremely fine." The marsh looked like a mirror broke and then someone set the pieces back wrong. Dragonfly S sketched nervous cursive over the water. Reeds leaned, confused which way was up. Far out where the muck turned to black shine, a rectangle of architecture hung from a point that wasn't above it, the floating annex. Hoisted like a lantern against a noon that had decided to dress as dusk. They crossed on planks that had never in their lives been meant to hold a fight. Every step complained. The air had weight at the center of the marsh, first in the ears, then in the throat, finally in the eyes, as if someone had been tightening a belt on the sky. Tenma waited on the far lip of the annex with the patient posture of a man who owns an hourglass and likes to watch. The perihelion eye was open, concentric rings like ripples a pebble makes when dropped into a well. He wasn't alone. Light gath read around him where he'd convinced it to wait. He looked at Naruto and said, "Open," as if addressing a shutter. "No," Naruto said, and felt suddenly stupid for how much he had wanted to. He glanced at Hinata. Her palm settled against the anchor spot. The braided paper touched skin and warmed. His lungs remembered their job. Ibuki slid null seal slats from his coat as if they were playing cards. "We don't throw them at him," he told his squad. "We staple the places he stands on." He tipped his head toward Karen. "You call the nodes." Karen's eyes unfocused in the way sensors do when they are listening to air and stone and the parts of people that don't shut up. "3, she said. "No, 5, moving. He's walking on lens points like stepping stones." "Fine," Tamari said, "we give him different stones." "Samui," Ibuki said. She stepped forward in that spare way of hers, sword point down, body a clean axis. "I'll cut lanes. I don't waste steel on tricks I can't reach." Shion stood at Naruto's left with a prayer board in each hand and the calm that belongs to people who look at a thing larger than law and decide to be precise anyway. "We hold a path long enough," she said. "You do not run through it alone. Together," Hinata said. The eclipse slid. Not night. A ring. Light poured around a black coin, the marsh catching it and throwing it back wrong. Birds that hadn't fled turned in circles midair like lost thoughts. Naruto closed one eye and then opened it again because both hurt equally and pain wasn't a decision maker today. Tenma crooked 2 fingers. The air between those fingers condensed into a bead of brilliance, and he flicked it, not at a person, but at the space just in front of Temari's fan. It popped. The recoil numbed her wrist. "Rude," Tamari said, and snapped the fan anyway. Her wind didn't slam. It drew, making a line across the annex that admitted movement on terms she chose. Naruto's ring caught that line and smiled, or maybe that was his mouth. Seconds, Hinata breathed, and pressed the countermark. Naruto opened the eclipse 3 notches. The pain licked with interest and then steadied under the anchor like a boiling pot pulled off direct heat. Color sharpened. Edges turned honest. Tenma's walking points lit like soft stars inside the bad geometry. Left node, Karen said, chin. 2 beats. Ibuki's slats flew. 1-2, clacking into open air. ND sticking as if there were nailheads under the sky. A strip of space that had been available to Tenma to stand on turned unreliable. Tenma shifted weight as elegantly as a dancer stepping over a rude child's foot. Again, Ibuki said. Hard right, Karen said. Samui cut the air with 2 small verticals that would have looked like nothing to anyone who didn't know how wind listens to steel. Those cuts made a pocket where Naruto could move without being drunk on the way the annex lied. He took it. Sasuke's step slid him a handspan and no more, but it was the correct handspan. Hinata's hand followed, warm and firm. Tenma's eye narrowed a fraction. Good. He lifted a palm and the annex remembered gravity the way a person remembers a song halfway through a drink. The floor bucked. Hinata's hand shoved hard. Back, she said. She slapped a prayer board into a blank patch of air and it held, a little table that didn't belong and didn't care. Naruto used it for a stride, thought to say thank you. Yelled instead because saying thank you while tripping makes you eat wood. Parhelion, Hinata said suddenly, voice bright over the dark ringed noon. Now, they had practiced this 100 times in a field that didn't change its mind under their feet. They'd done it twice where death was busy elsewhere. They'd never used it in the middle of the sky with a man who could slide the horizon like a bead on a wire watching. Corona burst from Naruto's forearm in a tight cylinder, not wide enough to be sloppy, not hot enough to blind. Hinata's palm entered at the elbow and split it, left, right, like a conductor dividing a chord. One burst hit nothing on purpose, flaring and dying to make Tenma's eye adjust. The second burst bit a lens point at the edge of the annex, knocked Tenma, and the ringed eye blinked. Karen's chain snapped through that blink and caught the point itself, iron on an idea. Hold, she hissed. The chain vibrated like a struck string, glyphs along it going red, then steadying. Tenma's mouth made the smallest line of displeasure. He tugged once. Experiment. Found resistance. And smiled again but differently now, a little more interested in their humanity, the way scholars get affectionate about inconveniences. Middle, Karen barked. Close. Ibuki didn't aim the next slat. He threw it where Karen's voice told him the node wanted to be in the next breath. It clacked INV. Sibley and everything in Naruto's ring sense tilted under his ribs in a way that meant we have a corner. Samui, Ibuki said. On it. Her cut landed not on Tenma, not even on the air next to him, but on the line his eye had been drawing between Naruto's heart and the sky. It broke the siphon the way a finger breaks surface tension in a glass. Naruto breathed without feeling watched by light. Tenem. Tasted blood again when Temari's fan forced him to step into a coil of his own lensing that Karen had tugged off to one side like a rug. He filed the information without looking surprised. You're learning, he said to no one and everyone. She exhaled into her joined hands. She set 3 boards in a triangle in the empty and the triangle stayed. We can hold a place, she told Naruto, and it felt like she was telling him something else too, something about people and choices and hands. If you go there. Hinata, Naruto said. Seconds, she answered, steady. He opened totality for the first time on purpose. It didn't look like rage. It didn't look like sunlight burned black. It looked like restraint with a ring of fire around it. Both aspects slid open together, solar and lunar, no. Wider than a man's palm and then a little wider because his habit is to overdo. The anchor dragged pain into a shape his body could pay. Hinata's palm burned through paper into skin and then into the thing under skin that listens to people more than to physics. The world slowed in the specific way timing does when everyone decides to hit the same note. Tenma's eye contracted, pupils within pupils. Lovely, he said, and raised his hand to take. Naruto didn't give, he took instead, not chakra, not distance, angles. He dropped penumbra veil not over Tenma's body but over the tiny lines his eye used as railings. He tilted those railings 3 degrees into wrong. Tenma's siphon slipped. Now, Hinata said, voice raw. Now now now. Tamari snapped wind along the path Shion had held, the lane stow. OD in the air like a hallway drawn with chalk. Karen's chain went live and sang. Ibuki threw 2 slats at once into an off-center nothing. Samui cut interference with a small, brutal economy that make instructors cry when they see it because not many students learn that clean. Naruto ran. Syzygy step mirrored itself. Light, shadow, until each blink was a clean skip across someone else's work. He fell. Hinata like a cord in his back and he didn't pull against it, he let it set the tempo. Tenma moved, laid by only a kindness. Naruto put his palm forward, not for Rasengan, not today, that was tunnel work and this was sky. He shaped Corona into a disc, thin as the coin the sun had become and just as rude, and drove it into the center of Tenma's lensing core where rings nested rings. It hit like a held breath let go. Tenma didn't scream. The perihelion eye dimmed, 2 rings losing a shade you couldn't name until it wasn't there. The lens bridges he'd been fussing with for fun sagged. One of the nodes Karen had been wrestling with went soft enough to tie. She did, viciously neat. The annex lurched as if it had been held in the teeth of a story and the storyteller had forgotten his place. Pain took Naruto's vision like a hand over a candle. He closed totality as neatly as he knew how and it still felt like slamming your fingers in a door. Hinata was already pulling, the countermarks burn. Turning sweet only because it meant he wasn't falling. He staggered into the triangle Shion had set and it held. Temari's wind shoved smoke-colored air into a route that carried them backward instead of down. Samui's shoulder slammed into Naruto's just hard enough to be a wall. Tenma stayed upright. He always had options. His eye ringed itself small to protect the dimmed rings. He took 2 steps back and gravity forgave him in a way it didn't forgive anyone else. I will return, he said simply. No rant, no claim, no name of doom, as if he were leaving a house before the tea got cold so he could come back and finish it right. Ibuki had been waiting for precisely that kind of sentence. Now, he snapped to his squad. 4 null seal cages flew, not at Tenma, but into the 4 nodes he had left. Chi opened because he was still a little surprised to be bleeding. The cages pinned those points like nails through the corners of a map. The annex's groan subsided to a low whine. Tenma's gaze flicked to Ibuki and did not bother to say clever. He lifted a hand as if to pull the nails back out with sight alone. The cages hummed, the hum people associate with stubborn floorboards and vows. He chose not to rip. He glanced once at Naruto, curious, amused, patient, and stepped out of the annex the way a man steps out of a shallow pool, then went up, then was small, then was gone. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like a breath they'd get to take again later if they didn't get cocky. The annex sagged toward the marsh, then remembered it shouldn't drown and stopped. Shion's hands shook openly now because the room didn't need her stillness like a shield anymore and bodies asked to tremble when the bill arrives. Samui exhaled. Tamari rolled her wrist and winced. Karen wiped her mouth on the back of her hand and declared, I hate space. Like she was breaking up with the sky. Naruto couldn't see, not black, not white, just a gray that moved when he blinked. Panic came, loyal as always. He shoved at it and it shoved back until Hinata's voice sat him down. No force, no feet, just here. Describe it, he asked, oddly small inside his own chest. Later, she said, now I'm going to say the boring things that keep you alive. Her fingers checked his pulse, pushed salt into his palm, lifted his canteen. Karen knelt on his other side and skimmed her chakra over the terrible bright soft mess behind his eyes. You scorched the edges and not the middle, she muttered. Good boy. Don't open anything for 24 hours or I will duct tape your face. I don't think we have duct tape, Naruto said, thirsty. Cloud does, Samui said. Unhelpfully helpful. The marsh cooled. Wind came off it that smelled like old pennies and plants that aren't sure they want to be plants. Ibuki collected the asked of his men with a glance and then sat on the annex edge like someone making himself be the thing people come to when something needs to be said out loud. We're done being a leash, he told no one in particular and everyone exactly. If the daimyo want one, they can buy a dog. We'll be an anchor ward, temporary, consent-based, small. The oaths will change. The lanterns get locked down unless we are pinning sky, not children. I'll sign it. I'll argue it. I'll get fired or I'll teach people with slower knives. Either way, this," he gestured to the place above the marsh where a man had just walked. "Lked away into space, is not a thing you meet alone." Naruto couldn't see the man's face, but he heard the way it sounded when certain people decide on something they can live with. "Good," he said hoarsely. "I'm busy." Temari snorted, pleased despite herself. "Konoha, you make enemies into coworkers like it's a hobby." "Overrated," Samui said, and bumped Naruto's shoulder once more, exactly enough to remind him where he was. "But sometimes useful." She steadied, palms cupped around a prayer flame as if closing her hands would hold it for the road. "He will come at crossings," she said, soft, a weather report. "Between seasons. Between wars. Between breaths. Your eye is a door he wants to use." "I'm changing the locks," Naruto said, aiming for light and hitting somewhere better. They came home by slower roads. The village had decided to be ordinary on purpose, laundry out, noodles steaming, laughter that wasn't sure of itself yet but wanted to be. People looked. People always look. So, one started to clap because that is what people do when they can't think of the right words and want to put their hands somewhere. Naruto slept like a man who'd been beaten with silk. Blind gray thinned by morning. He woke to the warmth of sun through paper and the sound of Hinata describing it anyway. Rooftops like boats, the noodle steam hanging lazy, the cat that had decided the Hokage monument was hers and no one else's. A man patching a fence with twine because he swore nails ruin character, a child in a yellow shirt absolutely sprinting for no reason except to feel air on teeth. "Yellow," he said, "not orange." "Orange," she amended, smiling. "Very loud orange." He breathed and didn't think about rings for 3 entire heartbeats. Then he did, because he's him. He opened one eye. The world's edges were kind again. He shut it, cautious, and let the picture sit where Hinata had put it with words. By late afternoon, Kakashi had them in a room that smelled like ink and tea and the kind of dust that only comes from thick books and lives on uniforms. Sakura quizzed Hinata on countermarks like a hungry student and Hinata answered like a person who had decided her voice belongs outdoors. Sasuke stood in the doorway using his glare as a veil and then said abruptly to Naruto, "Next time call me sooner," which meant don't go where you think you're the only key. "Yeah," Naruto said, not even pretending this time. "Next time." Karen took up space in the hospital corridors with her chain around her shoulders like she domesticated a lightning bolt. She lectured 3 Chunin, Cho. Pped the end off a roll of gauze with her teeth, and told Tsunade's assistant, who didn't deserve it, that if anyone tried to bill Naruto for medical tape she would invoice Orochimaru for their nonsense. Samui sent a report to Cloud that read, "If you stripped every nice word out, cooperation achieved, targets not idiots, potential for future coordination on sky nonsense." Then she drilled until dusk, and left Konoha with the same unhurried step with which she'd arrived, pausing only long enough to touch her fist to Naruto's shoulder. "Don't bleed where you can't stand up," she said. "You're short. It's a long fall." Temari delivered her own report to a sand council and didn't roll her eyes until she was already outside. She made for the training terrace and cut wind until her arms shook, thinking about lanes and about how she'd said, "Don't make me like you," and the idiot had, and thinking about the next time she'd fold air for him whether the paperwork wanted her to or not. Ibuki wrote all night in a room with a single candle and a window that looked like a scar. He crossed out containment writ twice. He wrote anchor so many times the word went shapeless and then found a shape he liked. In the morning he put the book away and began teaching men used to orders how to stand behind someone instead of in front. He was not kind. He was fair. Shein returned to the temple with prayer bore DS that smelled like marsh and paper that had learned skin. She scraped circles in a bowl and told acolytes, "If a candle can dim at noon, we can plan for it." She smiled at a wall where someone had ONCE sketched a child's drawing of a sun with a ring around it and didn't erase it. Naruto stood behind Ichiraku and washed his face in the pump water. The reflection wobbled. The ring behind his iris was there when the wobble calmed. For the first time since it had opened without permission in a field with a treacherous shuriken and a teacher's body in the way, he looked at it and didn't flinch. It's not a god, he said to it quietly. It's a door, and I get to decide who uses it. Hinata's shadow joined his in the water, conviction soft as a visible breath. You don't have to hold it by yourself, she said. I know, he said. And meant it. They turned to go when the air tugged, faint, nearly polite. Naruto looked up at a sky that had forgiven itself for earlier. Hi, thin cloud drew a paw. A ring around the sun that only people who have learned to notice would even see. He didn't reach for totality. He reached for her hand. Dango, he asked. Ramen first, Hinata said, decisive in the way that makes difficult things easier. And he let her win because she was right and because he wanted to and because the world is full of choices that look like fights until you admit their invitations. They walked under laundry and blew in the kind of wind that hides in hair. His palm was warm and his ring was quiet and the village was loud on purpose. Somewhere far past cloud and common sense, an eye with two dimmed rings turned once, thoughtful, and then looked away. There would be crossings. There would be hours where the sky behaved. Between them was the work, and the work was what you did with your hands and not with your speeches. Tomorrow, Naruto said out of habit. Tomorrow, Hinata agreed, and they stepped into the bright like it was theirs. Chapter 5 End.